Welcome, fellow dreamer. Tonight, we journey through humanity's timeless pursuit to capture the very essence of time itself, from the shadows cast by ancient sundials to the invisible rhythms of atoms that govern our modern world. This story unfolds alongside soothing music and gentle abstract imagery, revealing hidden wonders and captivating tales designed to nourish your curiosity as you drift peacefully towards sleep. So take a deep breath, settle into the comfort that surrounds you, and allow your mind and eyes to rest as we explore the fascinating story of how civilizations across the ages learned to measure the unmeasurable. Long before clocks adorned our walls or watches circled our wrists, our earliest ancestors lived in a world without hours, minutes, or seconds. Yet time was not absent from their lives. It flowed around them in rhythms as old as the earth itself, in patterns written across the sky and woven into the very fabric of existence. These ancient humans, emerging from the mists of prehistory, gradually awakened to something profound. The world moved in cycles, and survival depended on understanding them. Imagine for a moment those first glimmerings of awareness. A child watching the sun climb into the sky, reach its highest point, then descend again into darkness. At first, perhaps these changes seemed random or magical, but over time, through countless repetitions, patterns emerged from the chaos. The light always returned after darkness. The moon grew full, then slender, then full again. Cold seasons gave way to warm ones in an endless dance. Archaeological evidence suggests that humans began marking these observations tens of thousands of years ago. In caves across Europe, scratches on bones and stones hint at early attempts to track lunar phases. A wolf bone discovered in what is now the Czech Republic, dating back some 25,000 years, bears a series of marks that many researchers believe represent a lunar calendar. Whether used for tracking menstrual cycles, predicting animal migrations, or simply noting the passage of time, these marks reveal something extraordinary. Our ancestors were counting. The recognition of day and night must have been humanity's first temporal awareness. Even today, this remains our most fundamental division of time. The rotation of the Earth, creating alternating periods of light and darkness, would have governed nearly every aspect of early human life. Daylight meant safety, activity, hunting, gathering. Night brought vulnerability, rest, the need for fire and shelter. This binary rhythm shaped human biology itself, embedding within ourselves a circadian clock that still governs our sleep and waking cycles millennia later. But the daily cycle alone could not explain the full complexity of the world these early people inhabited. They noticed that the sun's path across the sky changed throughout the year. In some seasons it climbed high, bathing the world in warmth and making the days long. In other periods it traced a lower arc, bringing cold and extended darkness. The plants around them responded to these changes, blooming and withering in predictable sequences. Animals migrated, appeared, disappeared, and returned again. For hunter-gatherer societies, recognizing seasonal patterns meant the difference between feast and famine. Knowing when certain plants would produce edible seeds, when fish would run in the rivers, or when herds of prey animals would pass through specific territories, required an intimate understanding of time's longer cycles. This knowledge could not be casual or approximate. It needed to be precise, remembered, and transmitted across generations. The moon offered another celestial timekeeper, more visible and changeable than the steady sun. Its phases provided a natural way to divide the time between seasons into smaller, manageable units. 12 lunar cycles roughly matched the time between one winter and the next, creating what would eventually evolve into our concept of months and years. Many ancient cultures around the world, developing independently, arrived at similar lunar calendar systems, suggesting something fundamental about how human minds perceive and organize temporal patterns. Evidence from megalithic structures across the globe indicates that tracking celestial movements became increasingly sophisticated. Stone arrangements carefully aligned with solstices and equinoxes suggest that some prehistoric societies possessed remarkable astronomical knowledge. These were not crude markers, but precisely positioned monuments requiring planning, mathematical understanding, and sustained observation across many years. The people who built them were not simply reacting to time's passage, but actively studying it, measuring it, seeking to understand its mechanisms. The ability to anticipate future events based on past patterns represented a cognitive revolution. It required memory, pattern recognition, and abstract thinking. An animal might respond to the immediate cues of changing seasons, but humans could look at the sun's position in autumn and imagine the coming winter months ahead. They could plan, prepare, and make decisions based on events that had not yet occurred. This future-oriented thinking, deeply connected to temporal awareness, became one of humanity's defining characteristics. Social structures began to form around these temporal patterns. Communities gathered for seasonal festivals, marking important transitions in the year. Planting and harvest times required coordinated group effort. The ability to communicate about time, to agree on when certain activities would occur, necessitated developing shared concepts and eventually shared language for temporal measurement. When the moon is full, or when the sun reaches that mountaintop, became ways of coordinating collective action. Stories and myths arose to explain and encode temporal knowledge. Narratives about celestial bodies, seasonal deities, and cyclical creation myths served as mnemonic devices, helping societies preserve crucial information about time's patterns across generations before writing systems existed. An elder could teach a child the calendar, not through abstract numbers, but through engaging tales that made the information memorable and meaningful. As human settlements transitioned from nomadic to agricultural lifestyles, temporal precision became even more critical. Farming demanded knowing optimal planting times with accuracy that could determine whether a community would thrive or starve. The wrong timing might mean crops failing to mature before frost, or seeds rotting in spring rains. Agricultural societies developed increasingly refined methods of tracking time, marking the movement toward more formal timekeeping systems. Yet even as humans grew more adept at observing and predicting temporal patterns, the actual tools for measuring time remained simple. The sky itself was the clock, the seasons the calendar. Time was still something external, something read from the natural world rather than created or controlled by human devices. The sun's shadow falling across a rock the stars wheeling overhead, the changing face of the moon. These were the instruments available to our ancestors. This deep observation of natural cycles created an intimate connection between humans and the cosmos, a relationship that would gradually transform as artificial timekeeping devices emerged. But in those early millennia, time remained something vast and natural beyond human control, yet essential to understand. Our ancestors stood beneath the same sky we do, watching the same patterns, beginning the long journey toward mastering time's measurement. As human societies grew more complex and their need for precise temporal coordination increased, simple observation of natural cycles would no longer suffice. The stage was set for a revolutionary development, the creation of the first human-made instruments designed specifically to track time's passage. Among the earliest and most ingenious of these devices would be mechanisms that captured and measured something as ephemeral as a shadow. As humanity's awareness of time deepened through observation of natural cycles, the stage was set for something remarkable. The human mind, always seeking patterns and order, would soon discover that time itself could cast a visible shadow, transforming an abstract concept into something as tangible as the ground beneath one's feet. Picture the Nile Valley, perhaps 5,000 years ago. During a morning in ancient Egypt, a farmer, resting from his labor, notices his shadow stretching long across the earth as the sun climbs the eastern horizon. By midday, that same shadow has shrunk to almost nothing, pooling darkly at his feet. As afternoon progresses, the shadow extends again, this time reaching toward the east. Day after day, this dance repeats with remarkable consistency. Someone whose name has been lost to time recognized in this daily performance an opportunity. The sun's predictable arc across the heavens could become a clock, and shadows could become its hands. The earliest sundials were likely nothing more than simple vertical posts or stones set upright in level ground. These primitive gnomons, as the shadow-casting elements came to be known, transformed any flat surface into a timepiece. The Egyptians refined this concept with remarkable sophistication. Archaeological evidence suggests they created portable sundial instruments as early as 1500 BCE, though the practice of shadow watching almost certainly predates any physical artifacts that survived to our era. Egyptian shadow clocks took various forms, but one particularly elegant design resembled an L-shaped instrument. A horizontal bar marked with time divisions rested on the ground, with a vertical crosspiece at one end to cast the shadow. In the morning, the device would be oriented with the crosspiece facing east, allowing the westward moving shadow to travel across the marked divisions. At noon, the instrument would be rotated to face west, measuring the afternoon hours as shadows lengthened toward evening. These devices did more than simply mark time's passage. They represented a profound shift in human capability. For the first time, people could arrange to meet not at vague designations like morning or when the sun is high, but at specific, reproducible moments in the day. This precision, crude by modern standards but revolutionary for its time, enabled new forms of social organization and cooperation. Meanwhile, in Mesopotamia, the Babylonians were developing their own relationship with shadows and time. Their astronomers, who spent countless nights studying the heavens from temple ziggurats, understood celestial mechanics with impressive accuracy. They divided the day and night each into 12 equal parts, giving us an early ancestor of our modern 24-hour day. Babylonian sundials often featured hemispherical bowls with gnomons positioned at the center. As the sun traveled overhead, shadows would trace paths across the bowl's interior surface, marked with lines indicating both hours and seasons. This hemispherical design, called a hemicycle, revealed something important about the sun's behavior. The shadow's path across the bowl changed throughout the year as the sun's altitude varied with the seasons. A sundial could therefore serve not only as a clock, but as a calendar, helping observers track the year's progression through the changing geometry of shadows. Chinese civilization developed sundial technology independently, with evidence suggesting their use during the Zhou dynasty over 3,000 years ago. Chinese sundials often took the form of elaborate bronze instruments, featuring decorative elements alongside their practical time-marking functions. The Chinese approach to dividing the day differed from Mediterranean cultures, using a system of 12 double hours rather than smaller segments, each double hour associated with one of the animals in their zodiac cycle. As sundial technology spread and evolved, each culture adapted the basic principle to suit local needs and understanding. The Greeks contributed significant mathematical refinements, applying geometric principles to account for latitude variations. A sundial designed for Athens would not keep accurate time in Alexandria or Rome, as the sun's angle changes with position on Earth's surface. Greek mathematicians worked out the adjustments necessary to create sundials calibrated for specific locations. Roman engineers and craftsmen elevated sundial construction to an art form. Portable sundials became status symbols for wealthy citizens, crafted from precious materials and small enough to carry while traveling. Some featured folding gnomons and included tables to adjust readings for different latitudes. Public sundials adorned forums and marketplaces, becoming gathering places and reference points for civic life. The Romans understood that standardized timekeeping supported their vast empire's administrative needs, helping coordinate military movements, legal proceedings, and commercial activities across diverse territories. Yet for all their ingenuity and utility, sundials possessed inherent limitations that could never be fully overcome. Cloudy days rendered them useless, leaving communities without time reference when the sun hid behind overcast skies. Night hours remained beyond their reach, as did the interiors of buildings where shadows could not form. Furthermore, the length of daylight hours varies with seasons, particularly at higher latitudes. Ancient sundials often measured temporary hours, where daytime was divided into 12 equal parts regardless of season. A summer hour was therefore longer than a winter hour, a system that seemed strange to modern sensibilities, but made practical sense when artificial lighting was limited and human activities necessarily followed the sun's availability. Despite these constraints, sundials represented humanity's first successful technology for mechanizing time measurement. They transformed the sun, that distant ball of fire around which our planet orbits, into a faithful servant that reported its position through the simple geometry of light and shadow. For thousands of years, sundials remained among the most accurate timepieces available, consulted regularly to calibrate other timekeeping methods that would eventually emerge. Even as more sophisticated technologies developed, Sundials retain their place in human culture. Their presence on buildings, in gardens, and on public monuments served as reminders of our connection to celestial rhythms. They taught geometry, astronomy, and geographic awareness to generations of students, and they embodied a beautiful principle. That time, though invisible and intangible, could be captured and displayed through nothing more than light, shadow, and human cleverness. As evening approached in ancient cities, as shadows lengthened and merged into gathering darkness, the sundial's voice would fall silent until dawn. But humanity's need to measure time did not cease with sunset. This fundamental limitation would drive inventors and innovators toward new solutions. Methods that could track time's passage, regardless of weather, season, or the sun's presence in the sky. As the sun set and shadows faded into darkness, ancient peoples needed new ways to track the passage of hours. The sundial, for all its elegance, became useless under cloudy skies and utterly silent through the long stretches of night. Humanity's ingenuity would not accept these limitations, and so began the search for timepieces that could function regardless of weather or the sun's position in the sky. The answer, discovered independently by multiple civilizations, lay in observing substances that moved at predictable rates. Water, flowing steadily from one vessel to another, became one of humanity's first mechanical timekeepers. These devices, known as clepsydras, from the Greek words for water thief, appeared in ancient Egypt as early as the 16th century before the Common Era. The earliest designs were remarkably simple. A container with a small hole near its bottom allowed water to drip out at a supposedly constant rate, while marks on the interior showed how much time had elapsed as the water level descended. Egyptian priests used these water clocks in temples to mark the hours of nighttime rituals. In the darkness, when Ra's solar bark journeyed through the underworld, the gentle dripping of water provided a quiet but reliable pulse of passing time. The Egyptian clepsydras were often decorated with hieroglyphs and images of deities, transforming practical instruments into objects of beauty and religious significance. Some featured elaborate designs with multiple bowls and carved decorations, depicting the passage of months and seasons. Yet these early water clocks faced a significant challenge that their creators quickly recognized. Water does not flow at a truly constant rate from a container. As the water level drops, the pressure decreases, causing the flow to slow. Ancient engineers wrestled with this problem, developing increasingly sophisticated solutions. Some Egyptian designs featured conical shapes, wider at the top and narrower at the bottom, which helped compensate for the changing pressure. Others used a constant inflow method, where water poured steadily into a vessel that measured the rising level rather than the falling one. The Greeks and Romans embraced water clock technology with particular enthusiasm, refining it into mechanisms of remarkable complexity. The Greek inventor, Ingenious of Alexandria, working in the 3rd century before the Common Era, created clepsydras with elaborate feedback systems. His designs incorporated floating mechanisms that maintained constant water pressure, dramatically improving accuracy. Some of his clocks included moving figures, bells that rang at specific intervals, and even mechanical birds that sang to mark the hours. These were not merely timekeepers, but theatrical devices that transformed the abstract concept of passing time into something visible and audible. In ancient Rome, water clocks became essential instruments in law courts, where they measured the time allotted to speakers during trials. The phrase aqua exhausted, meaning water used up, signaled that an advocate's time had expired. Roman engineering skills produced clepsydras of impressive precision, some incorporating elaborate gearwork that translated the steady rise or fall of water into the rotation of hands on a dial, foreshadowing the mechanical clocks that would emerge over 1,000 years later. Across the vast expanse of Asia, Chinese inventors developed their own sophisticated water clocks, often combining timekeeping with astronomical observation. By the 8th century of the Common Era, Chinese engineers had created clepsydras of extraordinary complexity, featuring multiple water-driven mechanisms that tracked not just hours, but also the movements of celestial bodies. The most remarkable of these was constructed by the polymath Su Song in 1094, a clock tower over 30 feet tall that incorporated an early escapement mechanism driven by a water wheel. This astronomical clock could predict eclipses and track the positions of planets, demonstrating how timekeeping and astronomical knowledge intertwined. But water presented its own difficulties beyond mere engineering challenges. In cold climates, water froze, rendering these clocks useless during winter months. Temperature changes affected viscosity and flow rates, introducing errors that skilled clockmakers struggled to minimize. The need for a constant water supply and the maintenance required to keep channels clear of debris meant that water clocks demanded regular attention and care. The solution to water's limitations came from an unexpected source: sand. The hourglass, or sand glass, offered a portable alternative that proved especially valuable for those who traveled far from stationary water supplies. The earliest reliable references to sand-filled timekeepers appear in medieval Europe, though their invention may date back considerably earlier. These devices consisted of two glass bulbs connected by a narrow neck, with fine sand flowing from the upper chamber to the lower at a carefully calibrated rate. Sailors particularly valued hourglasses for their reliability aboard ships, where the rocking motion of waves made water clocks impractical. Maritime tradition developed around the turning of these glasses, with ship's boys responsible for inverting the timepiece and announcing each passage of the measured interval, often a half hour. The phrase, 8 bells marking the end of a 4-hour watch, derives from this practice, as the bell was rung each time the half-hour glass was turned. The creation of an accurate hourglass required considerable skill and experimentation. The sand itself had to be perfectly uniform in grain size, and various materials were tested to find the ideal properties. Some hourglasses used powdered marble, eggshell, or even iron filings. The narrowness of the neck opening, the shape of the bulbs, and the quantity of material all required precise calibration to produce consistent measurements. Master glassmakers became specialists in crafting these instruments, knowing that a ship's navigation or a scholar's experiments might depend on their accuracy. In monasteries and universities, collections of hourglasses of different durations allowed monks and scholars to measure various intervals. A lecture might be timed by one glass, a period of prayer by another, the boiling of medicines by a third. These humble instruments democratized timekeeping, in a way that expensive water clocks or sundials could not, making precise measurement accessible to anyone who could afford or craft a simple glass container. Both water clocks and hourglasses represented humanity's first steps toward freeing time measurement from dependence on the sky above. They were imperfect instruments, requiring frequent attention and calibration, yet they served faithfully for thousands of years. In temples and courtrooms, on ships and in studies, the steady drip of water and the quiet whisper of falling sand marked the passage of hours, reminding their users that time flows constantly forward, indifferent to cloud cover or the position of celestial bodies. These flowing timepieces carried civilization one step closer to the mechanical precision that would eventually transform how humanity understood and organized every aspect of daily life. As people grew accustomed to measuring durations independent of natural cycles, they began to imagine time itself differently, not merely as the sun's journey, but as something that could be captured, divided, and distributed according to human needs and purposes. As water clocks and hourglasses measured the passing hours within homes and temples, humanity's gaze turned upward to the vast celestial theatre overhead. The night sky offered something far grander than daily timekeeping. It promised an understanding of years, seasons, and the great cycles that governed life itself. Ancient peoples, standing beneath the wheeling stars, discovered that the heavens held patterns as reliable as any earthly clock, patterns that could predict the flooding of rivers, the arrival of game animals, and the proper moments to plant and harvest. The stone monuments of prehistoric Europe stand as silent testimony to this celestial awareness. On the Salisbury Plain of England, the massive sarsen stones of Stonehenge frame the sunrise on the summer solstice with breathtaking precision. Archaeological evidence suggests that construction began around 3000 BCE, with modifications continuing for over a millennium. The monument's builders possessed no written language that we know of, yet they encoded sophisticated astronomical knowledge into their arrangement of these multi-ton megaliths. The heel stone marks the midsummer sunrise, while other alignments track the winter solstice sunset and various lunar cycles. Standing within this ancient circle, one can almost feel the presence of those Neolithic observers who watch the sun's journey along the horizon change with the passing seasons, who noted how the full moon's rising point shifted over the course of 19 years. Far across the Atlantic, the Maya civilization developed what many scholars consider the most sophisticated calendar system of the ancient world. In the jungles of Mesoamerica, Maya astronomers made observations from temples rising above the forest canopy, tracking celestial bodies with remarkable accuracy, despite having no optical instruments. They recognized that Venus traced a pattern across the sky that repeated every 584 days, and they calculated the solar year to 365.242 days, a figure impressively close to modern measurements using advanced technology. Their Dresden Codex, one of the few Maya books to survive Spanish conquest, contains detailed astronomical tables predicting eclipses and planetary positions. The Maya actually used multiple interlocking calendar systems simultaneously. The Tzolk'in, or sacred calendar, ran for 260 days in an endless cycle, combining 13 numbers with 20-day names. The Harb approximated the solar year with 18 months of 20 days each, plus 5 extra days considered unlucky. These two calendars meshed like cosmic gears, creating a longer cycle of 52 years called the calendar round. Beyond even this, the Maya tracked an enormous stretch of time called the long count, which measured days from a mythological creation date corresponding to August 11th, 3114 BCE in our calendar. The mathematical elegance of these systems reflected a civilization deeply attuned to temporal patterns. In ancient Egypt, the heliacal rising of the star Sirius, its first appearance in the dawn sky after a period of invisibility, announced the imminent flooding of the Nile. This annual inundation deposited rich nutrients across the floodplain, making Egyptian agriculture possible in the midst of desert. The Egyptians developed a calendar of 12 months with 30 days each, adding 5 extra days at the year's end for religious festivals. Though this 365-day year gradually drifted out of alignment with the actual solar year, the system served Egyptian society for thousands of years. Egyptian priests maintained careful records of astronomical events, tracking not just Sirius, but also the movements of planets they called the tireless ones for their wandering paths among the fixed stars. The ancient Chinese developed their own sophisticated understanding of celestial cycles, creating a lunisolar calendar that harmonized the moon's phases with the solar year. Their system required careful observation and calculation to determine when intercalary months should be added to keep festivals aligned with agricultural seasons. Chinese astronomers maintained detailed records of unusual celestial phenomena, comets, novae, and eclipses, some of which modern astronomers still consult when researching historical astronomical events. The Chinese emperor's court astronomer held a position of tremendous importance, as the accuracy of the calendar reflected directly on the emperor's mandate to rule. An eclipse that occurred without proper prediction could be interpreted as a sign of heavenly displeasure. In Babylon, astronomer priests called Chaldeans studied the heavens from ziggurat towers, developing detailed models of planetary motion. They divided the ecliptic, the sun's apparent path through the stars, into 12 sections, creating the zodiacal system still familiar today. Babylonian astronomical diaries, inscribed in cuneiform on clay tablets, recorded planetary positions, lunar phases, and weather observations over centuries. This accumulated data allowed them to recognize periodic patterns and predict future celestial events with increasing reliability. The Babylonian month began with the first sighting of the crescent moon after the new moon, and priests would watch the western horizon at sunset to declare each new month's start. The Polynesian peoples, who navigated vast stretches of open ocean in their voyaging canoes, developed calendars based on the rising and setting of particular stars at sunset and dawn. Different star groups marked different seasons across the Pacific Islands. The Pleiades cluster, known by various names throughout Polynesia, signaled important seasonal transitions. In Hawaii, the rising of this star cluster marked the beginning of Makahiki, a season of harvest festivals and peace. Without written records, Polynesian navigators and priests transmitted intricate calendrical knowledge through oral tradition, embedding astronomical information in chants, songs, and stories that could be memorized and passed across generations. The Islamic calendar, established in the 7th century CE, represented a purely lunar system of 12 months, totaling approximately 354 days. Unlike lunisolar calendars that add periodic extra months, to stay synchronized with seasons. The Islamic calendar allowed its months to drift through the solar year. This meant that Ramadan, the month of fasting, could fall in any season over the course of about 33 years. Islamic scholars developed sophisticated methods for predicting the crescent moon's first visibility, which determined the start of each month, taking into account geographical location, atmospheric conditions, and the geometry of sun, moon, and earth. These diverse calendrical systems shared a common foundation: careful, patient observation of the sky, combined with mathematical reasoning to find patterns in apparent chaos. Whether encoded in standing stones, written in hieroglyphs on papyrus, pressed into wet clay, or memorized in sacred chants, this knowledge transformed human existence. Farmers could anticipate seasons, religious communities could coordinate celebrations, and rulers could legitimize their authority through mastery of celestial cycles. The calendar became more than a practical tool. It represented humanity's growing confidence in the comprehensibility of nature's rhythms. As these ancient astronomers tracked the stately dance of celestial bodies, other inventors sought methods to measure shorter durations within homes and temples. The aromatic smoke of incense and the steady flame of marked candles would soon offer new solutions to the eternal question of how time passes while we sleep or pray. As civilizations developed increasingly sophisticated ways to mark the passage of days and seasons, the need arose for methods that could measure shorter intervals of time, particularly during the long hours of darkness, or when clouds obscured the sun. Into this need came an elegant solution that married the practical with the poetic: the measurement of time through controlled burning. The concept was beautifully simple. A candle of uniform thickness would burn at a relatively consistent rate, and by marking its length at regular intervals, one could observe the gradual consumption of wax and estimate how much time had passed. The earliest documented use of candles for timekeeping appears in ancient China, though the practice likely emerged independently in various cultures once candle-making technology became widespread. Unlike the sundial that required sunlight or the water clock that could freeze in winter, the candle clock offered a warm, glowing solution that worked equally well on the darkest night or the brightest day. King Alfred the Great of England, who ruled in the late 9th century, reportedly used candles marked with intervals to help organize his day between royal duties, religious devotion, and study. According to historical accounts, his candles were crafted to burn for specific durations, allowing him to allocate his waking hours with methodical precision. Each candle stood in a protective lantern made of thin horn panels, shielding the flame from drafts that might cause irregular burning. This attention to environmental conditions revealed an early understanding that accurate timekeeping required controlling the variables that affected the burning rate. In medieval European monasteries, candles served as silent sentinels through the night hours, their steady consumption marking the intervals between prayers. Monks on vigil duty would observe these measured candles, knowing that when the flame reached a particular mark, it was time to wake the community for midnight prayers or early morning devotions. The soft light of these timepieces created an atmosphere of calm contemplation, their gentle flickering a reminder of time's steady passage through the quiet hours. Yet it was in Asia that the art of burning timekeepers reached perhaps its most refined and aromatic expression. In China, Japan, and other parts of East Asia, incense clocks transformed timekeeping into a multi-sensory experience. These ingenious devices used carefully prepared incense mixtures that burned at controlled rates, measuring time not only visibly, but through fragrance as well. The incense clock took many forms, each suited to different purposes and settings. One common design involved long sticks of incense, similar to those still used today, but calibrated so their length corresponded to specific time intervals. Temple keepers would light these incense sticks at sunset, and their gradual shortening through the night marked the hours until dawn. The fragrant smoke, rising in delicate spirals, became a visible manifestation of time itself drifting away. More elaborate incense clocks featured intricate designs pressed into beds of incense ash or molded into specific shapes. A craftsman would create a seal or stencil with channels forming a maze-like pattern, press it into a bed of fine incense ash, then carefully remove the seal, leaving behind narrow trenches. These trenches would be filled with powdered incense, creating a continuous path that, when lit at one end, would smolder slowly along the prescribed route. The burning point would creep along the path like a tiny glowing traveler on a very slow, low journey, taking hours or even days to complete its course. Some of these incense seals bore decorative patterns representing dragons, flowers, or characters symbolizing good fortune. The act of preparing and lighting such an incense clock became a meditative ritual in itself, requiring patience and precision. Different sections of the path might be filled with different incense blends, so that as the hours passed, varying fragrances would drift through the space, each scent associated with a particular time of day or night. The practical applications extended beyond simple time measurement. In some designs, small metal weights with strings attached would be positioned along the incense path at specific intervals. As the smoldering incense burned through each string, its weight would drop into a metal bowl below, creating a gentle chime that marked the hour even if no one was watching. This allowed the incense clock to serve as an alarm, its soft musical note awakening someone from meditation or sleep at a predetermined moment. In Japan, the geisha houses of the Edo period used incense clocks to measure the time spent with clients, with payment calculated according to how many incense sticks had burned during a visit. This practice gave rise to specific terminology around time measurement that reflected the intimate connection between burning incense and passing hours. The advantages of these burning timepieces were numerous. They required no complex mechanisms, no weights or gears that might break or need adjustment. The materials were relatively inexpensive and widely available. They worked independently of weather conditions, geographic location, or astronomical observations. In temples and monasteries, the fragrant smoke served the dual purpose of marking time while purifying and sanctifying the space, creating an atmosphere conducive to spiritual practice. Yet these methods also had their limitations. The burning rate could vary with air pressure, humidity, and temperature. A draft might cause uneven burning or extinguish the flame entirely. The candles and incense required regular replacement and could not be paused or adjusted once lit. Unlike a mechanical clock that could be wound or reset, a burning timepiece once consumed was gone forever, a poignant reminder of time's irreversible nature. The preparation of incense for clockmaking became a specialized craft, with artisans developing recipes that burned at the most consistent rates possible. They experimented with different wood powders, binding agents, and aromatic compounds, seeking the perfect balance between fragrance, burn rate, and structural stability. This knowledge was often closely guarded, passed down through generations of incense makers who understood that their craft served not merely aesthetic purposes, but the practical need for reliable time measurement. As the night deepens and we consider these ancient timepieces, we might imagine a medieval monastery in the hours before dawn, a single marked candle burning steadily in its protective lantern. Or perhaps a temple in ancient China, where spiral incense coils hang from the ceiling, their glowing tips slowly traversing the curves, filling the air with sandalwood and time itself made visible as smoke. These burning clocks measured duration in the most tangible way, consuming themselves in service of marking moments, leaving nothing behind but the knowledge that time had passed and would continue passing, steady and sure as a flame in still air. As the glow of incense clocks faded and the last measured candle burned down in distant temples, a new rhythm was emerging across medieval Europe. In the stone corridors of monasteries and abbeys, a profound transformation in humanity's relationship with time was taking shape. The gentle chiming of bells would soon organize not just the days of monks and nuns, but entire communities, marking a turning point in how civilization itself would come to understand the hours. The monastic day revolved around what became known as the canonical hours, a cycle of prayer times that divided each day and night into sacred segments. These hours had their origins in ancient Jewish prayer practices and early Christian traditions, but by the medieval period, they had evolved into a precise structure that governed monastic life. Matins arrived in the darkest hours before dawn, followed by lauds at daybreak. Prime marked the first hour of daylight, around 6 in the morning by our modern reckoning. Terce came at the 3rd hour, Sext at the 6th, and None at the 9th hour of daylight. Vespers celebrated the evening, and Compline brought the day's prayers to a close before the community retired for sleep. To maintain this demanding schedule, someone needed to stay awake through the night, watching the stars or monitoring water clocks and candles to determine when to wake the community for matins. This sacred responsibility of timekeeping became central to monastic discipline. The individual charged with this duty would ring a bell, and that simple sound would ripple through silent cloisters, calling the faithful to prayer regardless of season or weather. These monastery bells served a purpose far beyond the walls that enclosed them. In an age when most people possessed no personal timepieces, and the sundial fell silent after dark, the regular tolling of church bells became the public clock of medieval society. Farmers working in surrounding fields could orient their day around these familiar sounds. Merchants in nearby towns learned to associate certain bells with specific times for opening markets or closing shops. The bells transformed from religious instruments into community timepieces, their bronze voices carrying temporal information across valleys and villages. As monasteries grew in wealth and influence, their bell towers became more elaborate. By the 12th and 13th centuries, great cathedrals competed to construct ever taller towers, their bells audible for miles in every direction. These towers stood as vertical monuments to time itself, their presence on the horizon a constant reminder of the hours passing. The sounds they produced became woven into the fabric of medieval consciousness, as familiar and essential as the changing seasons. The technology of bell ringing evolved alongside these architectural achievements. Simple rope systems gave way to more sophisticated mechanisms. Large bells required considerable effort to ring, and monastery engineers developed counterweight systems and wooden frameworks that made the task more manageable. Some communities employed multiple bells of different sizes and tones, creating sequences of sounds that could communicate various messages. 3 bells rung together might signal a different hour or occasion than 2 bells or a single peal. This auditory timekeeping transformed social organization in profound ways. Before the regular ringing of bells, communities operated on what historians sometimes call task time rather than clock time. People worked until a job was finished, ate when hungry, and slept when tired. The rhythm of agricultural labor followed the sun and seasons without much concern for precise hours. But as bell towers became ubiquitous, a new temporal consciousness began to emerge. Time became something external, measured and announced, rather than purely internal and felt. Towns that grew up around monasteries and cathedrals developed their civic life in harmony with these bells. Guild meetings might be scheduled for after the bells of sext. Court sessions could convene at none. Market days opened and closed according to these bronze announcements. Gradually, municipal authorities began installing their own bells in town halls and civic towers, asserting secular control over this powerful tool of social coordination. These civic bells rang for town councils, announced curfews, warned of fires or threats, and marked the hours of permitted commerce. The standardization of time through bells created new forms of social discipline. Workers could be expected to arrive at certain hours and labor for defined periods. Appointments became possible in ways they had not been before. Punctuality transformed from an abstract concept into a practical expectation. This shift happened slowly, over generations, but its effects rippled through medieval society in countless ways. Not everyone welcomed this increasing regimentation of daily life. Some voices, preserved in poems and complaints from the era, expressed frustration with the tyranny of the bells. Craftspeople who had once worked by natural light and personal rhythm now found themselves bound to external schedules. The freedom of task time gave way to the discipline of measured hours. Yet this transformation proved irreversible. Once communities organized themselves around regular temporal markers, returning to more fluid arrangements became nearly impossible. The bell towers themselves became objects of civic pride and competition. Cities vied to construct the tallest towers with the most impressive bells. Master bell founders developed sophisticated techniques for casting bronze bells with pure, resonant tones that could carry across great distances. The largest bells received names and became beloved landmarks, their distinctive voices recognizable to anyone within hearing range. Some bells that first rang in medieval towers still sound today, their bronze voices connecting us across centuries to those who first organized their lives around these measured hours. Inside the monasteries where this transformation began, the canonical hours continued their ancient rhythm, largely unchanged, even as the world outside grew increasingly temporal in its consciousness. Monks and nuns rose in darkness for matins, gathered again at dawn for lauds. and proceeded through their day in the pattern established centuries before. Their dedication to this schedule, maintained through all seasons and circumstances, represented one of medieval Christianity's most distinctive features. As night fell across monastery and town alike, the bell for Compline would ring one final time, its notes fading into darkness. The community would settle into sleep, but the passage of hours continued, marked in the silent turning of water clocks and the slow burning of candles, until once again the bell for matins would sound in the deep night, calling the faithful to prayer and announcing to all who heard it that time, invisible and inexorable, continued its eternal flow. This marriage of sacred purpose and temporal measurement set the stage for the next great revolution in timekeeping, one that would emerge from the very bell towers that now dominated Europe's skyline. As the bells of medieval monasteries continued their rhythmic marking of the canonical hours, a profound transformation was quietly beginning in the towers and workshops of 13th century Europe. The mechanical clock, perhaps one of humanity's most ingenious inventions, was about to emerge from the creative minds of craftsmen whose names have largely been lost to history. The exact moment of the mechanical clock's birth remains shrouded in the mists of time, which seems fitting for such a revolutionary device. What we do know is that by the late 1200s, large mechanical clocks began appearing in the towers of churches and public buildings across Europe. These weren't the ticking timepieces we might imagine today, but rather massive assemblages of iron gears, weights, and ingenious mechanisms that represented the cutting edge of medieval engineering. At the heart of these early mechanical clocks lay a brilliant innovation called the verge and foliot escapement. This mechanism solved a problem that had puzzled inventors for generations: how to convert the continuous force of a falling weight into the measured, step-by-step movement needed to mark time accurately. The escapement allowed a suspended weight to descend slowly and steadily, controlling its fall through a series of precisely timed interruptions. A horizontal crossbar called the foliot would swing back and forth, regulated by small weights that could be adjusted to speed up or slow down the clock's pace. Imagine standing in a medieval cathedral as one of these early timepieces began its operation. The sound would have been distinctive, a rhythmic clicking and clacking as metal teeth engaged and released, the heavy weights descending almost imperceptibly through the tower's interior. These clocks typically had no face or hands as we understand them today. Instead, they rang bells to announce the hours, extending the role that monasteries had established, but now with mechanical precision rather than human judgment. One of the earliest documented mechanical clocks was installed in the tower of Westminster Palace in London around 1288. Shortly thereafter, similar devices appeared in churches and civic buildings throughout England, France, Italy, and the German states. Each installation represented not just a practical tool for timekeeping, but a statement of prestige and technological prowess. Towns competed with one another to build ever more elaborate clock towers, transforming these mechanisms into symbols of civic pride and progress. The city of Strasbourg became particularly renowned for its astronomical clock, first built in the 1350s. This remarkable device did far more than simply tell the time. It tracked the movement of celestial bodies, displayed the positions of the sun and moon, and featured mechanical figures that emerged to perform elaborate sequences when the hours struck. Crowds would gather to witness these automated spectacles, marveling at the ingenuity that could bring metal and wood to life through nothing more than weights, gears, and careful calibration. As mechanical clocks spread across Europe, a new profession emerged: the clockmaker. These skilled artisans combined the precision of metalworking with the mathematical understanding needed to calculate gear ratios and regulate mechanisms. Clockmakers formed guilds in major cities, carefully guarding their techniques and training apprentices in their intricate craft. The knowledge of how to design and maintain these complex machines became a valuable commodity, and master clockmakers found their services in high demand. The creation of a large tower clock was no small undertaking. It might take years to forge and shape all the necessary components, each gear wheel cut by hand with files and chisels. The iron used in these early clocks had to be of exceptional quality, strong enough to withstand constant stress, yet workable enough to be shaped with medieval tools. Blacksmiths and clockmakers worked closely together, combining their expertise to bring these mechanical marvels into being. These early mechanical clocks were not particularly accurate by modern standards. They might gain or lose 15 minutes or more in a single day, requiring frequent adjustment by the clockkeeper, a new position created specifically to maintain and regulate these temperamental machines. The clockkeeper would observe the sun's position or use a sundial to reset the mechanical clock regularly, bridging the gap between ancient solar timekeeping and emerging mechanical precision. Despite their limitations, mechanical clocks represented a fundamental shift in humanity's relationship with time. Unlike sundials that tracked the sun's apparent movement, or water clocks that measured duration through flow, mechanical clocks created time through their own internal rhythm. They imposed their regular beat upon the world, rather than merely observing natural cycles. Time was becoming something measured, divided, and controlled by human invention. The spread of mechanical clocks gradually transformed daily life in medieval towns and cities. Work schedules became more regulated. Markets opened and closed at specific hours, announced by the clock tower. Legal proceedings and civic meetings could be scheduled with new precision. The clock's chimes became a shared reference point for an entire community, synchronizing human activity in ways that had never before been possible. Interestingly, these early mechanical clocks often displayed unequal hours, continuing a tradition from ancient times. The period of daylight might be divided into 12 hours, regardless of the season, meaning that hours were longer in summer than in winter. Only gradually did clockmakers shift to equinoctial hours of consistent length, a change that better suited mechanical timekeeping's inflexible regularity. As the 14th century progressed, mechanical clocks became increasingly sophisticated. Some featured multiple dials, showing not just hours, but also the date, the phase of the moon, and astrological information deemed important for medical practice and daily decision-making. Automata grew more elaborate, with mechanical figures striking bells, trumpeting, or enacting religious scenes at appointed times. The technology slowly began its journey from public spaces into the private realm, though this transition would take centuries to complete. A few exceptionally wealthy individuals commissioned large chamber clocks for their palaces, massive devices that might occupy an entire room. These early domestic clocks were as much about displaying wealth and sophistication as about practical timekeeping. The mechanical clock's emergence marked the beginning of a revolution that would ultimately transform human civilization. As these ingenious machines spread from town to town, from cathedral to courthouse, they carried with them new possibilities for coordination, scheduling, and temporal precision. The rhythmic clicking of gears and the regular chiming of bells announced not just the hours of the day, but the arrival of a new era in humanity's ancient quest to capture and measure time's elusive flow. The great mechanical clocks that now graced cathedral towers and city squares across Europe represented a remarkable achievement, yet they shared a common limitation that bound them to their foundations. These magnificent timepieces, with their weighted drives and intricate gear trains, could not travel. They stood as fixed monument to human ingenuity. But time itself moves with us through our days, and humanity longed for a companion that could journey alongside. The answer emerged in the form of a simple coiled ribbon of metal, though calling it simple belies the sophistication of its conception. The mainspring, a strip of hardened steel wound tightly within a circular drum, possessed the remarkable ability to store energy and release it gradually through hours of steady unwinding. Unlike the weights that powered tower clocks, requiring long drops and substantial height, a mainspring could fit within a space no larger than a man's palm. This innovation, appearing in the early decades of the 15th century, would transform timekeeping from architecture into something personal and portable. The precise origin of the mainspring remains somewhat obscured by the mists of history, as often happens with inventions that emerge gradually rather than in singular moments of revelation. Various clockmakers across Europe experimented with spring-driven mechanisms, each contributing refinements to the concept. Yet one name has endured through the centuries with particular prominence, that of Peter Henlein, a locksmith and clockmaker working in the German city of Nuremberg during the early 1600s. Henlein's workshop, situated in a city renowned for its metalworking craftsmen, became the birthplace of what contemporaries called the Nuremberg egg. Though these early portable timepieces bore little resemblance to eggs in their actual form, these first pocket-sized clocks measured several inches across and possessed a cylindrical or spherical shape, hanging from chains or cords that their wealthy owners wore as pendants. The mechanisms within represented a triumph of miniaturization, translating the complex escapements and gear trains of tower clocks into packages that could rest in a person's hand. The journey from concept to reality presented formidable challenges. A mainspring's force changes as it unwinds, delivering stronger impulses when fully wound and weaker ones as it approaches exhaustion. This variation threatened to make any spring-driven clock wildly inaccurate, racing ahead in its early hours and gradually slowing as the spring's energy depleted. Clockmakers developed ingenious solutions to this problem, most notably a cone-shaped device called a fusee, connected to the mainspring by a length of chain or cord. As the mainspring unwound, the chain moved along the fusee's changing diameter, creating a mechanical compensation that evened out the force delivered to the clock's gears. The fusee represented mathematical principles made manifest in brass and steel, a physical equation that balanced the spring's decreasing power. These early portable timepieces served primarily as status symbols rather than practical instruments. Their accuracy left much to be desired, often varying by hours throughout a day. They possessed only a single hand, marking the hours without attempting to track minutes, for their mechanisms lacked the precision to make such granular measurements meaningful. Yet their owners treasured them not for utility, but for the marvel they represented. To carry time itself upon one's person, to possess a miniature cosmos of gears and springs that echoed the celestial motions, marked one as a person of considerable wealth and sophistication. The decoration of these early watches reflected their role as jewelry and art objects. Craftsmen engraved their cases with elaborate scenes, religious imagery, or geometric patterns. Some cases featured windows allowing viewers to observe the mechanisms within, transforming the clock's interior into a display of perpetual motion. Others incorporated additional complications, astronomical indicators, or calendar functions that added to their complexity and value. Each piece represented weeks or months of painstaking labor by master craftsmen who often worked alone or with a single apprentice. As decades passed, the technology gradually improved. Clockmakers discovered better techniques for tempering steel springs, making them more reliable and consistent in their force. The development of jeweled bearings, using hard gemstones like rubies as surfaces for pivot points, reduced friction and wear in the delicate mechanisms. Cases became more refined, evolving from spherical forms to flattened shapes that fit more comfortably in pockets or purses. The addition of a minute hand appeared gradually as accuracy improved sufficiently to make such precision meaningful. The spread of portable timepieces beyond the courts of nobility and merchant princes occurred slowly over generations. Each watch remained essentially unique, handcrafted by individual makers who stamped their names or marks into the mechanisms. This bespoke nature ensured that watches remained expensive luxuries throughout the 16th and 17th centuries. A quality pocket watch might cost as much as a horse or represent months of wages for a skilled artisan. Yet their presence in society grew steadily, creating a new awareness of time's passage as something that could be consulted at any moment, rather than only when church bells rang or public clocks chimed. The psychological impact of portable timekeeping deserves reflection as we drift through this history. When time measurement existed only in public spaces, in town squares and church towers, time belonged to the community, marked collectively and experienced communally. The portable watch began a subtle transformation, making time personal and private. An individual could now know the hour independent of authority, could make appointments and measure durations without reference to public timekeepers. This shift, barely noticeable at first, would gradually reshape human consciousness and social organization in ways its inventors could hardly have imagined. The workshops where these marvels took shape filled with specialized tools and the quiet sounds of patient craftsmanship. Watchmakers hunched over benches in the best light available, manipulating components measured in fractions of inches with tools of their own making. Files and lathes reduced brass stock to precise gears. Polishers brought surfaces to mirror brightness. The work demanded steady hands, sharp eyes, and years of accumulated knowledge about how metals behaved under stress and wear. Each completed timepiece represented not just one craftsman's skill, but generations of accumulated wisdom about materials and mechanisms. As we settle deeper into rest, we can appreciate how these early portable timepieces, imperfect as they were, represented a bridge between eras. They carried forward the mechanical principles developed for tower clocks, while pointing toward a future when accurate timekeeping would become universally accessible. The springs and spirals that drove them coiled with potential energy, much as the innovation they represented coiled with potential to transform human society. Tomorrow's journey through time will lead us to even greater precision. But tonight, we can rest with these early watches, ticking softly through centuries past, measuring hours that have long since dissolved into memory. The portable timepieces that emerged from the innovations of the mainspring had made time something one could carry, yet they remained frustratingly unreliable. A watch might gain or lose 15 minutes in a single day, and even the finest table clocks drifted considerably over time. The world was ready for a breakthrough that would transform timekeeping from an approximate art into something approaching genuine precision. That transformation would come from an unlikely source: the gentle, rhythmic swing of a weighted cord. In the city of Leiden, in the Dutch Republic, a young scholar named Christian Huygens occupied himself with problems of mathematics and natural philosophy during the middle years of the 17th century. Born into a prominent family in 1629, Huygens possessed one of those rare minds that could perceive hidden patterns in the physical world. He had already made important contributions to mathematics and astronomy when, in 1656, he turned his attention to a phenomenon that had fascinated the great Galileo decades earlier: the curious properties of the pendulum. The story goes that Galileo, while attending services in the Cathedral of Pisa as a young man, had noticed a lamp suspended from the ceiling, swinging gently in the drafts. Using his own pulse as a rough timer, he observed something remarkable. Whether the lamp swung through wide arcs or narrow ones, each oscillation seemed to take the same amount of time. This property, known as isochronism, meant that a pendulum's period of swing depended primarily on its length rather than the amplitude of its motion. Galileo had recognized the potential for timekeeping, and late in his life, he had sketched designs for a pendulum clock, though he never built a working model. Huygens approached the problem with mathematical rigor that Galileo had not fully developed. He calculated the precise relationship between a pendulum's length and the time of its swing, deriving formulas that would allow clockmakers to design pendulums with exact periods. But understanding the theory was only the beginning. The true challenge lay in connecting this regular oscillation to the gear trains and hands of a clock in such a way that the mechanism would sustain the pendulum's motion without interfering with its natural rhythm. The solution Huygens devised was ingenious in its elegance. He created an escapement mechanism that gave the pendulum a tiny push with each swing, just enough to overcome friction and air resistance, while simultaneously allowing the clock's gears to advance by precisely one increment. The pendulum controlled the release of the clock's energy through this escapement, transforming the steady pull of weights into the measured tick-tock that would become the heartbeat of accurate timekeeping. When Huygens completed his first pendulum clock in 1656, the improvement over existing timepieces was nothing short of revolutionary. Where the best mechanical clocks of the day might err by 15 minutes daily, Huygens's pendulum clock maintained accuracy to within about 15 seconds per day. This represented a 60-fold improvement in precision, achieved through a mechanism of remarkable simplicity. The long case that would later become familiar in grandfather clocks served a practical purpose. It housed the pendulum and protected it from air currents that might disturb its swing. Word of this invention spread quickly through the scholarly networks of Europe. Huygens published a treatise describing his clock in careful detail, sharing his discoveries with the scientific community. Clockmakers across the continent began incorporating pendulums into their designs, each adding refinements and modifications. The pendulum clock became the standard against which all other timepieces would be measured for the next 3 centuries. Astronomers welcomed these precise clocks with particular enthusiasm. The observation of celestial events required accurate time measurement, and pendulum clocks finally provided the reliability that astronomical work demanded. Observatories from Greenwich to Paris installed pendulum clocks as essential instruments, using them to record the precise moments when stars crossed meridian lines or when planets reached specific positions. These observations, in turn, improved astronomical tables and advanced humanity's understanding of celestial mechanics. Yet even as pendulum clocks spread throughout Europe, clockmakers discovered limitations. Temperature changes affected the metal pendulum rod, causing it to expand or contract, and thus altering its length and period. A clock perfectly regulated at one temperature would gain or lose time as the seasons changed. Ingenious solutions emerged. The gridiron pendulum used alternating rods of different metals that expanded at different rates, compensating for each other's changes. The mercury pendulum employed a container of liquid mercury whose upward expansion balanced the downward expansion of the rod. These compensated pendulums maintained remarkable accuracy across varying conditions. The pendulum's influence extended beyond simple timekeeping. Scientists used precisely timed pendulums to measure gravity's acceleration, discovering that it varied slightly at different latitudes and elevations. This led to deeper understanding of Earth's shape and structure. The regular beat of pendulum clocks also provided a standard for music, with metronomes adopting the same principle to help musicians maintain steady tempo. In homes and public buildings, the presence of pendulum clocks changed how people experienced time itself. The visible swing of the pendulum and the steady tick of the escapement created a physical manifestation of time's passage. Unlike earlier clocks that might run silently or erratically, the pendulum clock announced each passing second with reassuring consistency. Time became something not just observed on a dial, but heard and, in a sense, felt through the rhythm that pervaded spaces where these clocks resided. As the decades passed following Huygens' invention, pendulum clocks grew more refined and more accurate. By the 18th century, the finest examples could maintain precision to within a few seconds per week. Clockmakers developed longer pendulums beating once per second, creating clocks of impressive height and stately presence. The craft of clockmaking flourished, with master artisans creating timepieces that were both scientific instruments and works of decorative art, their cases crafted from fine woods and embellished with elegant details. The pendulum clock represented more than technological achievement. It embodied a shift in humanity's relationship with time, demonstrating that natural principles, properly understood and applied, could create order and precision in daily life. For nearly 3 centuries, until other technologies would eventually surpass it, the swinging pendulum remained the most faithful marker of time's steady passage. its gentle rhythm measuring out the moments of countless lives across the civilized world. As pendulum clocks brought unprecedented accuracy to observatories and scientific institutions on land, the vast oceans remained treacherous spaces where time could not be reliably kept. Ships sailed guided by the stars, their captains able to determine latitude by measuring the sun's height at noon, but longitude remained an elusive mystery that cost countless lives and fortunes. The inability to know one's east-west position on the open sea was not merely an inconvenience. It was among the most pressing scientific challenges of the 17th and 18th centuries. The problem was elegantly simple in theory, yet devastatingly complex in practice. Longitude could be calculated if a navigator knew the precise time at a reference point, such as Greenwich, and could compare it to local time determined by the sun's position. Each hour of difference represented 15 degrees of longitude, but maintaining accurate time aboard a pitching, rolling vessel exposed to salt spray, temperature extremes, and humidity proved nearly impossible with existing technology. Pendulum clocks, so revolutionary on land, became useless when the ship's motion disrupted their steady swing. The consequences of this navigational blind spot manifested in tragedy after tragedy. Ships sailed for weeks without certain knowledge of their position, captains relying on dead reckoning, educated guesses based on speed, direction, and elapsed time to chart their progress across featureless oceans. When these estimates proved wrong, vessels ran aground on unexpected shores or missed their destinations entirely, crews perishing from starvation and scurvy as they searched for landfall that never appeared. The most infamous disaster occurred in October of 1707, when Admiral Sir Cloudesley Shovel led a British fleet homeward from Gibraltar through thick fog. Believing themselves safely west of the dangerous rocks off France's coast, the ships were actually near the Scilly Isles, southwest of England. 4 warships struck the rocks in the darkness, and nearly 2,000 sailors drowned in the cold waters, including the Admiral himself. The magnitude of this catastrophe, combined with England's growing maritime empire and commercial ambitions, transformed longitude determination from an academic curiosity into a matter of national urgency. In 1714, the British Parliament passed the Longitude Act, offering prize money of unprecedented scale to anyone who could devise a practical method for determining longitude at sea. The largest reward, £20,000, a fortune equivalent to millions today, would go to a solution accurate to within half a degree, or 30 nautical miles, after a voyage to the West Indies. Committees of scientists and naval officials would evaluate proposals, and the challenge attracted schemes both brilliant and absurd from astronomers, inventors, and dreamers across Europe. Many believed the solution would emerge from astronomical observation. If precise tables of the moon's position against background stars could be calculated, and if instruments could be developed to measure these positions from a moving ship, navigators might determine time through celestial mechanics. Astronomers labored over lunar tables, and instrument makers refined sextants and other devices for measuring angles between heavenly bodies. The astronomical approach held tremendous appeal for the scientific establishment, rooted as it was in pure mathematics and observation of the cosmos. But there was another path, one that seemed almost foolishly ambitious: create a clock so robust and accurate that it could keep time precisely through months of ocean voyage, despite all the environmental challenges ships endured. This was the path chosen by John Harrison, a self-educated carpenter and clockmaker from Lincolnshire, whose obsessive dedication would span 4 decades and produce some of the most remarkable timepieces ever constructed. Harrison was born in 1693 and grew up helping his father repair clocks, teaching himself the intricate mechanics of gears and escapements. He possessed an intuitive understanding of friction, temperature effects, and the physical principles that governed mechanical timekeeping. Unlike the gentleman scientists and established clockmakers of London, Harrison approached problems from first principles, willing to abandon conventional designs entirely if innovation promised better results. His first sea clock, which he called H1, took 5 years to build and weighed 72 pounds. Completed in 1735, it featured interconnected balances that compensated for the ship's motion, functioning as a kind of mechanical self-leveling system. Brass and steel components were carefully selected to counteract temperature changes. As one metal expanded with heat, another contracted, keeping the mechanism's dimensions stable. Harrison eliminated the need for lubrication, which could thicken in cold or become thin in heat, by using special materials for bearing surfaces. H1 performed remarkably on its trial voyage to Lisbon, but Harrison, ever the perfectionist, saw room for improvement. He began work on a second timepiece, then a third, each incorporating refinements and innovations. The board of Longitude provided modest payments to support his work, but decades passed without a final solution. Harrison's clocks, though increasingly sophisticated, remained large and complex, and skeptics questioned whether a mechanical solution could ever match astronomical methods. Then, in 1759, Harrison completed something entirely different. His fourth timepiece, H4, abandoned the large mechanism of its predecessors in favor of a watch-like design just 5 inches in diameter. It resembled an oversized pocket watch, elegant and almost simple in appearance, though its internal mechanisms represented the culmination of everything Harrison had learned. The temperature compensation was achieved through a bimetallic strip, and the escapement incorporated jeweled bearings that reduced friction to nearly nothing. H4's trial voyage to Jamaica in 1761 proved extraordinary. After 81 days at sea, the timepiece had lost only 5 seconds, performance far exceeding the Longitude Act's requirements. Yet the board of Longitude, dominated by astronomers invested in celestial solutions, demanded another trial. Political complications, scientific jealousy, and bureaucratic reluctance to award the prize created years of frustration for the aging Harrison. A second voyage to Barbados in 1764 again demonstrated H4's precision, but still the full prize was withheld. Harrison, now in his 70s, found an unlikely ally in King George III, who took personal interest in the chronometer and its persecuted inventor. Royal intervention finally pressured Parliament to award Harrison most of the prize money in 1773, though the board of Longitude never fully conceded defeat. The story's importance extends far beyond one man's vindication. Harrison proved that precision timekeeping could be achieved mechanically in the harshest conditions, opening the door for other craftsmen to refine and produce marine chronometers. By the early 19th century, chronometers were standard equipment on naval and merchant vessels, their steady ticking providing the temporal anchor that allowed ships to fix their position with confidence. The oceans, once limitless and unknowable, became navigable with precision. Trade routes shortened, shipwrecks decreased, and the world grew smaller as reliable navigation transformed maritime commerce and naval power. The Longitude Problem solution represents a triumph of mechanical ingenuity over seemingly insurmountable challenges, demonstrating how accurate timekeeping could mean the difference between life and death, success and failure, across the empty expanses of the sea. With John Harrison's triumph in solving the longitude problem, accurate timepieces had proven their worth beyond any doubt. Ships could now navigate with confidence across vast oceans, their chronometers ticking faithfully through storms and calm alike. Yet even as maritime timekeeping reached new heights of precision, a different kind of temporal chaos was brewing on land, brought about by one of the 19th century's most transformative innovations, the railroad. Before the railway age, time had been an intensely local affair. Each town and city determined its own time by the sun's position at noon, when shadows were shortest. This meant that when the sun reached its highest point in Bristol, it was already past noon in London, situated further east. The difference amounted to only about 10 minutes, but it was a genuine difference nonetheless. Multiply these variations across an entire continent, and you had hundreds, even thousands of different local times, each perfectly valid for its own locality. For centuries, this arrangement had caused no particular difficulty. When the fastest travel was by horse or sailing ship, a few minutes' difference between neighboring towns hardly mattered. A traveler moving westward would simply adjust their pocket watch upon arrival at each destination, setting it by the local church clock or town sundial. Time was something that belonged to places, not to vast regions or nations. The railroad changed everything with startling suddenness. These iron horses moved too quickly for the old casual approach to time. A train departing at noon by one town's clock might be scheduled to arrive at its destination at 1 o'clock. But whose 1 o'clock? The departure city's noon and the arrival city's noon were not the same moment. Railway companies attempting to publish timetables found themselves entangled in bewildering confusion. Passengers missed connections, freight shipments went astray, and the potential for catastrophic collisions on single-track lines grew alarmingly real. The solution adopted by early British railways was to run all their trains on London time, regardless of local custom. Railway stations began displaying two clocks, one showing local time, the other showing railway time. This created its own peculiar situations, with townspeople maintaining their traditional solar time, while the new clock at the railway station marched to London's rhythm. Gradually, however, the railway's version of time began to dominate. The trains were simply too important, too central to modern commerce and communication, to ignore. By the middle of the 19th century, most of Britain had synchronized to a single time standard. This Greenwich Mean Time, based on observations at the Royal Observatory, became the temporal backbone of the expanding railway network. The changeover happened surprisingly quickly, within just a few decades, though some localities held out longer than others, clinging to their ancient prerogative to determine their own noon. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, the situation in North America was far more chaotic. The vast continental expanse of the United States and Canada contained a bewildering multitude of local times. Some sources suggest there may have been over 300 different local times in use across North America in the early 1880s. Major railway hubs like Pittsburgh operated on multiple different time standards simultaneously, depending on which railway company's trains were arriving or departing. Station clocks might display 3 or 4 different times at once, each corresponding to a different line. The confusion reached farcical proportions. Railway travelers carried elaborate conversion tables. Station managers developed headaches trying to coordinate schedules. The margins for error in train operations grew dangerously thin. It became clear that something had to give, that the old way of understanding time as a purely local phenomenon could not survive in an age of rapid mechanical transportation. Enter Sanford Fleming, a Scottish-Canadian engineer and railway planner, whose experience with continental railways had given him an intimate understanding of the time problem. While travelling in Ireland in 1876, Fleming missed a train due to a scheduling error involving the 12-hour clock notation, where afternoon times could be confused with morning times. This personal inconvenience sparked his thinking about time standardization on a grand scale. Fleming proposed a system that was elegant in its logic. Divide the world into 24 time zones, each spanning 15 degrees of longitude, each exactly 1 hour different from its neighbors. Within each zone, everyone would use the same time. The zones would be referenced to a prime meridian, and Fleming suggested that for practical purposes, they should run through Greenwich, where the Royal Observatory's timekeeping had already achieved wide acceptance in maritime navigation. His proposal met resistance from multiple quarters. Some viewed it as an assault on local tradition and autonomy. Others questioned whether ordinary people could adapt to using a time that might differ noticeably from the sun's actual position. Some communities argued that their particular location should be the prime meridian, bringing national pride into the discussion. Nevertheless, the practical advantages were undeniable. North American railways began implementing a modified version of Fleming's system in 1883, establishing 5 time zones across the continent. The changeover happened on November 18th, a day that became known as the Day of 2 Noons in some locations, where clocks were reset in the middle of the day to align with the new standard zones. The following year, representatives from 25 nations gathered in Washington for the International Meridian Conference. After lengthy deliberations, they agreed to adopt Greenwich as the prime meridian and endorsed the concept of standardized time zones. The vote was not unanimous, and some nations took years or even decades to fully implement the system, but the foundation had been laid for a globally coordinated approach to time. This transformation represented something profound beyond mere convenience. For the first time in human history, the measurement of time was deliberately disconnected from immediate local observation of celestial movements. Time became abstract, standardized, imposed by consensus rather than derived directly from natural phenomena. A person in the western portion of a time zone might experience noon by the clock, when the sun was still climbing toward its zenith. The agreed-upon fiction of zone time replaced the astronomical reality of solar time. People adapted more readily than skeptics had predicted. The advantages for commerce, communication, and travel proved compelling. Telegraph networks, which had grown alongside railways, made it possible to synchronize clocks across vast distances almost instantaneously. Major cities began offering time signals, sometimes dropping balls from tall towers at precisely noon, allowing anyone with a clear view to set their timepiece accurately. As the gentle rhythm of standardized time settled over the industrialized world, humanity had taken another step in its long journey of organizing, controlling, and ultimately abstracting the measurement of temporal flow. The pocket watches that now graced workers' vests and gentlemen's waistcoats would soon become even more ubiquitous, as manufacturing innovations made them available to almost everyone, regardless of social station. The world had been carved into time zones. The railways had synchronized their schedules, and now a new transformation awaited. As the 19th century progressed into its final decades, timepieces remained largely the province of those with means. A quality pocket watch represented weeks or even months of wages for an ordinary worker. Yet within the bustling factories of New England and beyond, a revolution in manufacturing was about to democratize time itself, placing the power of precise timekeeping into millions of hands that had never held such instruments before. The story of mass-produced timepieces begins not in the traditional watchmaking centers of Switzerland or England, but in the emerging industrial landscape of America. Here, entrepreneurs recognized that the principles transforming other industries, standardized parts, mechanized production, division of labor, could be applied to the intricate world of watchmaking. This was a radical departure from centuries of tradition, where skilled craftsmen laboriously created each timepiece by hand, filing and fitting components until they worked together in delicate harmony. In the workshops of Waltham, Massachusetts, a man named Aaron Lufkin Dennison envisioned something entirely different. Having worked in a watch repair shop, Dennison understood the frustration of dealing with watches whose every component was unique. If a gear broke, a replacement had to be custom made. He dreamed instead of watches whose parts could be swapped freely, manufactured to such exacting tolerances that any escape wheel would fit any watch of the same model. Any mainspring could replace another. The technical challenges were immense. Traditional watchmakers worked by eye and feel, using hand files to achieve the precise dimensions needed. Dennison and his partners needed machines that could work to tolerances of thousandths of an inch, again and again, producing identical components. They invested in specialized lathes, milling machines, and measuring instruments. They developed gauges to verify each component met specifications. Slowly, methodically, they created an entirely new way of making watches. The American Waltham Watch Company, established in its permanent form in the late 1850s, became the proving ground for these revolutionary methods. Workers specialized in specific tasks rather than creating entire watches. One person might spend their days making nothing but balance wheels, while another assembled escapements from pre-made parts. The watches moved along in batches, each station adding its contribution to the growing mechanism. The Civil War provided crucial validation for these industrial timepieces. Military officers needed reliable watches, and they needed them in quantities traditional methods could never supply. The Waltham factory worked at capacity, and soldiers carried these American-made watches into battle. Unlike the delicate European imports favored by earlier generations, these watches proved rugged and reliable. When repairs were needed, watchmakers in field camps could replace broken parts without custom fitting, a tremendous practical advantage. After the war, other manufacturers recognized the potential. In Elgin, Illinois, another large factory rose, following similar principles of mechanized production and interchangeable parts. Competition drove innovation and efficiency. Production numbers climbed from hundreds to thousands to tens of thousands of watches annually. Prices that had once represented months of wages dropped to weeks, then days. The cultural transformation rippled outward in ways both obvious and subtle. Farmers who had once relied on the sun's position began checking pocket watches. Factory workers synchronized their arrivals and departures with unprecedented precision. Small-town merchants who had operated by approximate time found themselves expected to open and close at specific, advertised hours. The watch became not merely a convenience, but a necessity for participating in modern economic life. The designs evolved to meet different needs and budgets. Railroad workers, whose schedules demanded absolute reliability and whose safety depended on accurate timekeeping, could purchase specially certified railroad-grade watches meeting stringent standards for accuracy and durability. These featured bold, easily read faces and robust movements designed to maintain their precision despite constant motion and varying temperatures. At the other end of the spectrum, simpler models with fewer jewels and less elaborate finishing brought basic timekeeping within reach of nearly anyone earning regular wages. The Swiss, watching from across the Atlantic, initially dismissed these industrial methods as producing inferior goods. Their craftsmen took pride in their traditional skills, in the artistic finishing of each component, in movements that represented individual mastery. Yet as American watches proved themselves reliable, and as market share shifted, Swiss manufacturers faced a choice: adapt or decline. Gradually, reluctantly, they began incorporating manufacturing techniques that balanced their tradition of quality with the efficiency of mechanized production. The pocket watch achieved a kind of golden age in the decades surrounding the turn of the 20th century. Designs became standardized around sizes measured in lignes, an old French unit that persisted in watchmaking. Cases ranged from plain nickel to elaborately engraved gold, from utilitarian hunters with protective covers to elegant, open-faced designs. Inside, movements ticked away with increasing reliability, their jeweled bearings and compensated balances maintaining accuracy within seconds per day. Repair and maintenance networks spread alongside the watches themselves. Small towns acquired trained watchmakers who could service these standardized mechanisms. Mail-order catalogs offered replacement crystals, chains, and parts. The ecosystem supporting pocket watch ownership became as ubiquitous as the watches themselves, embedding precise personal timekeeping ever deeper into the fabric of daily life. For millions of people, the ritual of winding and setting a pocket watch became as natural as any morning routine. The weight of it in a vest pocket, the satisfying click as the cover opened, the quiet tick audible in moments of silence. These sensory experiences connected individuals to the technological achievement represented by their timepiece. Time was no longer something announced by distant bells or approximated by the sun's arc. It was personal, portable, and precise. The social changes extended beyond mere punctuality. Scheduling became more granular, more specific. Morning and afternoon gave way to exact meeting times. The phrase "on time" acquired new meaning and new moral weight. To be late suggested not merely poor planning, but a kind of character flaw, a failure to respect others' time now that everyone could measure it so precisely. As the new century dawned, millions of pocket watches ticked in millions of pockets, a distributed network of personal timekeepers that had been unimaginable just decades before. The Industrial Revolution had transformed time from a scarce resource, carefully measured by expensive instruments, into something approaching a commodity, still valued, still important, but now accessible to nearly everyone. The relationship between humanity and measured time had shifted fundamentally, and another transformation awaited just over the horizon, one that would move timepieces from pockets to wrists and change their nature once again. As the 20th century dawned and pocket watches had become commonplace among working people across the industrialized world, a curious transformation was about to occur in how timepieces were worn. The wristwatch, which would soon become the dominant form of personal timekeeping, began its life as something quite different from what it would eventually become. In the closing decades of the 19th century, small watches mounted on bracelets or leather straps were occasionally seen adorning the wrists of fashionable women in European society. These delicate timepieces were considered decorative jewelry rather than serious instruments for keeping time. They were ornamental accessories, often elaborately decorated with gems and precious metals, designed to complement an elegant outfit rather than serve any practical purpose. Serious timekeeping remained the domain of the substantial pocket watch, secured by a chain and consulted with deliberate formality. Gentlemen of the era would have found the idea of wearing a watch on their wrist rather eccentric, even effeminate. The robust pocket watch represented reliability and masculine practicality. It was a tool of business and industry, weighty and substantial in the hand. To suggest that a man might wear his timepiece on his wrist like a bracelet would have seemed as peculiar as suggesting he might carry a lady's handbag. Yet the seeds of change were already being planted in unexpected places. In the late 1880s, the German Imperial Navy commissioned watchmaker Girard-Perregaux to create wristwatches for naval officers. These early military wristwatches never achieved widespread adoption, but they represented an early recognition that certain circumstances might make a wrist-mounted timepiece more practical than fumbling with a pocket watch. The true catalyst for change came with the challenges of modern warfare. As the new century progressed and military technology evolved, soldiers found themselves in situations where consulting a pocket watch became impractical or even dangerous. Artillery officers needed to coordinate bombardments with split-second precision. Pilots in the newly invented airplanes required both hands for controlling their fragile aircraft while still needing to monitor time for navigation. Infantry officers leading attacks across no man's land discovered that reaching into a pocket for a watch while managing weapons, maps, and whistle signals proved nearly impossible. During the Second Boer War, at the turn of the century, British soldiers began improvising solutions, strapping their pocket watches to their wrists with leather straps or pieces of uniform fabric. These makeshift arrangements worked well enough that officers started requesting purpose-built wristwatches from jewelers and watchmakers back home. The Swiss watch industry, always alert to new opportunities, began producing watches specifically designed to be worn on the wrist, featuring protective grills over the crystal to prevent damage from impacts. When the Great War erupted in 1914, the practical advantages of wristwatches became impossible to ignore. Trench warfare created an environment where timing was critical for survival. Attacks had to be coordinated precisely across miles of front lines. Artillery barrages needed to lift at exact moments to allow infantry advances. In the chaos and danger of combat, soldiers needed immediate access to accurate time without exposing themselves unnecessarily or occupying their hands. The military authorities of all nations involved in the conflict began issuing wristwatches to officers, and soon the demand exceeded available supply. Watchmakers across Switzerland, Britain, and America adapted their production lines to create more robust wristwatches suitable for military conditions. These watches featured luminous dials painted with radium so they could be read in the darkness of trenches and dugouts. They had protective metal grills over the glass crystals, later replaced with thicker, more durable crystals that could withstand rough handling. Leather straps were designed to be adjustable and replaceable, recognizing that they would wear out in harsh field conditions. The transformation in public perception happened remarkably quickly. Soldiers returning from the front continued wearing their wristwatches, finding them far more convenient than reverting to pocket watches. These veterans had proven their masculinity beyond question in the crucible of war, and if they chose to wear wristwatches, any stigma of effeminacy simply evaporated. What had been considered a feminine accessory just a few years earlier suddenly became a mark of military service and modern practicality. Watchmakers recognized this shift and began marketing wristwatches to civilian men with advertisements that emphasized their military heritage and practical advantages. The watches became more refined for peacetime use while retaining their essential durability. Cases were made more elegant, straps were crafted from finer leathers, and the overall aesthetic shifted from purely utilitarian to stylishly functional. Women's wristwatches, meanwhile, evolved along parallel tracks, becoming more diverse in style and increasingly accepted as both decorative and practical. The war years had seen many women taking on roles traditionally held by men, and this broader social change was reflected in their embrace of functional timepieces that served purposes beyond mere decoration. By the 1920s, the wristwatch had completed its remarkable transformation. What had been a novelty before the war was now becoming the standard form of personal timekeeping. Pocket watch production began its slow decline, though many traditional gentlemen continued to prefer them for decades. The wristwatch had proven itself more than a passing fashion. It represented a fundamental shift in how people related to personal timekeeping, with time literally at hand, instantly visible with just a glance. The technical challenges of creating reliable wristwatches drove innovation in miniaturization and durability. Watches needed to withstand the constant motion and impacts of daily wear while maintaining accuracy. Watchmakers developed better sealing mechanisms to protect against moisture and dust. They refined shock absorption systems to protect delicate components from the jostling of active movement. The balance wheels and hairsprings had to perform reliably, despite being subjected to varying positions throughout the day as the wrist moved and rotated. As the 1920s progressed into the 30s, wristwatches became increasingly sophisticated and varied. Manufacturers competed to create ever more reliable, accurate, and stylish designs. The wristwatch had firmly established itself as the timepiece of the modern age, a symbol of progress and practicality that had emerged from the crucible of conflict to become an essential accessory of daily life. The age of the wristwatch had truly begun, setting the stage for the next revolution in timekeeping technology that would emerge in the decades to come. As wristwatches became fixtures on the wrists of men and women across the globe, settling into their role as everyday companions, a quiet revolution was taking shape in the laboratories of scientists and engineers. This revolution would not arrive with the familiar ticking of gears and springs, but with the silent, steady vibration of a crystalline mineral that had existed in the earth for millions of years. The story begins with an observation made by French physicist Jacques Curie and his brother Pierre in the year 1880. While studying various crystalline structures, they discovered something remarkable about quartz. When they applied mechanical pressure to a piece of this common mineral, it generated a small electrical charge. Even more intriguing, they found the effect worked in reverse. When electricity was applied to quartz, the crystal would change shape ever so slightly, vibrating at an incredibly stable frequency. This phenomenon, which came to be known as the piezoelectric effect, seemed like a curious laboratory discovery at first, with no obvious practical applications. Yet this property of quartz would eventually transform the entire landscape of timekeeping in ways the Curie brothers could scarcely have imagined. For decades, this knowledge remained primarily a scientific curiosity. The mechanical timepieces of the late 19th and early 20th centuries had reached impressive levels of refinement. Fine watches could keep time to within a few seconds per day, which seemed adequate for most purposes. Yet scientists working in fields requiring extreme precision began to dream of something more accurate, something that could measure time in ways that gears and springs never could. The First World War accelerated many technological developments, and in its aftermath, scientists returned to peacetime research with renewed energy. In the 1920s, a Canadian telecommunications engineer named Warren Marrison was working at Bell Telephone Laboratories in New York, grappling with problems of signal frequency in telephone systems. He needed a highly stable frequency standard to serve as a reference for his experiments. Marrison's thoughts turned to quartz crystals and their remarkable piezoelectric properties. He reasoned that if he could make a quartz crystal vibrate at a consistent rate using electrical current, he might have the stable frequency source he needed. Working with his colleague Joseph Horton, Marrison constructed a device that would change everything. In 1927, they unveiled the world's first quartz crystal clock. This initial timepiece was hardly portable. It filled an entire room with its vacuum tubes, circuits, and temperature-controlled chamber housing the precious quartz crystal. The crystal itself had been carefully cut and shaped, because the angle and dimensions of the cut determined the precise frequency at which it would vibrate. Marrison's crystal oscillated at a frequency of 100,000 cycles per second, a rate far beyond anything achievable with mechanical movements. The accuracy was immediately apparent and astounding. Where the finest mechanical chronometers might lose or gain several seconds per day, the quartz clock maintained precision to within a few thousandths of a second daily. For astronomical observatories and research institutions, this represented a quantum leap forward in their ability to measure time precisely. Yet these early quartz clocks remained laboratory instruments, far too large and delicate for everyday use. They required constant temperature control because even slight variations in temperature would affect the vibration rate of the crystal. They needed stable electrical power and careful calibration. The technology was revolutionary, but it would take decades of refinement before quartz timekeeping could escape the laboratory. Throughout the 1930s and 40s, researchers gradually improved quartz clock designs. They developed better methods for cutting crystals to optimize their frequencies. They created more sophisticated temperature compensation systems. During the Second World War, quartz crystal technology found important applications in radio communications, where stable frequencies were essential. This military funding accelerated development and helped solve many technical challenges. The post-war years brought continued refinement. Scientists learned to grow synthetic quartz crystals with more consistent properties than natural crystals possessed. They developed smaller, more efficient electronic circuits to drive the crystals and count their oscillations. Temperature compensation became more sophisticated, allowing quartz clocks to maintain accuracy across wider environmental variations. By the 1950s, quartz clocks had become the timing standards for national laboratories and observatories worldwide, replacing the pendulum clocks that had dominated for 3 centuries. These quartz standards ticked off time with such precision that they revealed irregularities in the Earth's rotation itself, variations that had been impossible to detect with earlier timekeeping methods. Still, these remained specialized scientific instruments, expensive and complex. The breakthrough that would bring quartz technology to the masses required one more crucial innovation: the transistor. As solid-state electronics replaced vacuum tubes during the 1960s, circuits became dramatically smaller, cheaper, and more efficient. Suddenly, the electronics needed to drive a quartz crystal and convert its high-frequency oscillations into displayable time could fit into a space small enough for a wristwatch. The race to create the first quartz wristwatch engaged horologists and electronics companies across several continents. Swiss watchmakers, long dominant in the industry, worked alongside their traditional rivals, the emerging Japanese electronics firms. American companies applied their expertise in semiconductor technology. The convergence of traditional watchmaking skill with cutting-edge electronics created fascinating hybrid industries. On Christmas Day, 1969, the Japanese company Seiko released the Astron, the world's first production quartz wristwatch. It was an extraordinary achievement, containing a miniature quartz crystal oscillating at a frequency carefully tuned to exactly 32,768 vibrations per second. This specific frequency was chosen because it could be easily divided down using binary electronics to produce a 1 pulse per second signal. The Astron was expensive, priced at approximately the same cost as a medium-sized automobile, yet it represented something previously unimaginable: observatory-grade accuracy on your wrist. The watch could maintain precision to within 5 seconds per month, performance that would have seemed like magic to John Harrison or Christian Huygens. The technology evolved with breathtaking speed as manufacturing techniques improved and production volumes increased. Prices plummeted while reliability improved. The 1970s saw an explosion of quartz watch designs, with digital displays soon joining traditional analog hands. By the end of that decade, quartz watches cost less than many mechanical timepieces, while vastly outperforming them in accuracy. This dramatic shift sent shockwaves through the traditional watchmaking industry, particularly in Switzerland, where centuries-old firms found themselves struggling to compete. The period became known as the Quartz crisis, as the marriage of timekeeping and electronics transformed a centuries-old craft into a modern technological product. Yet the same qualities that made quartz crystals ideal for timekeeping found applications far beyond wristwatches. Quartz oscillators became essential components in countless electronic devices, providing the stable timing signals needed for computers, telecommunications equipment, and eventually the digital devices that would fill modern homes and pockets. The humble silicon dioxide crystal, shaped and tuned with precision, became one of the quiet enablers of the digital age. The quartz revolution had brought timekeeping accuracy to the masses, but in the laboratories of the world's premier scientific institutions, researchers were pursuing something far more extraordinary. They sought a level of precision that seemed almost impossible, a clock so accurate that it would neither gain nor lose a second over millions of years. The answer lay not in crystals or mechanical components, but in the fundamental nature of atoms themselves. The journey toward atomic timekeeping began with physicists exploring the quantum world, that strange realm where matter and energy behave in ways that seem to defy common sense. Scientists had discovered that atoms, when excited by energy, vibrate at extraordinarily consistent frequencies. Unlike pendulums affected by temperature or quartz crystals influenced by manufacturing variations, the vibration rate of a specific type of atom remained constant throughout the universe. It was as if nature had provided a perfect metronome, ticking away at an unchanging rhythm since the beginning of time itself. In the years following World War II, researchers at the National Bureau of Standards in the United States and the National Physical Laboratory in Britain began serious work on harnessing this atomic precision. They focused their attention on cesium, a soft, silvery metal that becomes liquid just above room temperature. Cesium atoms possess a particular property that makes them ideal for timekeeping. When exposed to microwave radiation at just the right frequency, the atoms transition between two specific energy states in a remarkably predictable and stable manner. The first true atomic clock began operation in 1955 at the National Physical Laboratory in Teddington, England. Louis Essen and Jack Parry had created a device of remarkable complexity, one that used a beam of cesium atoms traveling through a vacuum chamber. As these atoms passed through a cavity filled with microwave radiation, scientists could detect when the frequency was precisely tuned to cause the maximum number of atoms to change their energy state. This moment of resonance occurred at exactly 9,192,631,770 times per second. It was this natural frequency that would become the heartbeat of modern timekeeping. The accuracy was breathtaking. While the finest quartz clocks might drift by a second or two over several years, these early atomic clocks would take thousands of years to accumulate even a single second of error. Suddenly, all previous definitions of the second seemed arbitrary and imprecise. For centuries, the second had been defined as a fraction of Earth's rotation or its journey around the Sun, but these astronomical movements were not perfectly regular. Earth's rotation gradually slows due to tidal forces, and its orbit shows tiny variations. Atomic vibrations, by contrast, appeared to be genuinely constant. In 1967, the scientific community made a profound decision. At the 13th General Conference on Weights and Measures, delegates agreed to redefine the second based not on the motion of celestial bodies, but on the vibration of cesium atoms. 1 second would now officially be defined as the duration of those 9 billion plus vibrations of the cesium atom. For the first time in human history, our fundamental unit of time was anchored not to the Earth or Sun, but to the unchanging properties of matter itself. Laboratories around the world began constructing their own atomic clocks, each contributing to an increasingly precise understanding of time. These devices grew larger and more sophisticated, filling entire rooms with vacuum chambers, magnetic shields, and forests of electronic equipment. Scientists discovered countless subtle effects that could influence accuracy. Temperature fluctuations, magnetic fields, even the gravitational pull of objects in the room could introduce tiny variations. Each of these challenges was methodically addressed with better shielding, more stable environments, and more refined measurement techniques. By the 1970s and 80s, atomic clocks had become so accurate that they revealed something extraordinary. Time itself flowed at slightly different rates depending on altitude and velocity, just as Einstein's theories had predicted decades earlier. Atomic clocks placed at different elevations showed measurable differences in their timekeeping, with clocks at higher altitudes running slightly faster than those closer to Earth's center. The effect was minuscule, mere billionths of a second, but it was real and measurable. Time, it turned out, was not the absolute unchanging framework that everyday experience suggested. The development of atomic fountains in the 1990s pushed accuracy even further. In these elegant devices, clouds of cesium atoms are launched upward like a fountain of invisible particles, slowed to a crawl by laser cooling until they move at barely more than walking speed. As these ultra-cold atoms drift upward and then fall back down under gravity, they spend more time interacting with the microwave radiation, allowing even more precise measurements of their natural frequency. These atomic fountain clocks achieved uncertainties measured in quadrillionths of a second, accuracy so extreme that they would take tens of millions of years to drift by even 1 second. Today, the world's most accurate atomic clocks reside in climate-controlled laboratories, where dedicated teams of scientists continuously monitor and refine their performance. These timepieces serve as primary frequency standards, the ultimate references against which all other clocks are calibrated. Networks of atomic clocks around the world communicate their measurements, and sophisticated algorithms combine their individual readings into an even more stable composite timescale. This international effort ensures that humanity speaks with one voice when declaring what time it is, regardless of location or nation. The implications of such extraordinary precision extend far beyond simply knowing the exact time. These atomic clocks enable technologies that have become woven into the fabric of modern life, from telecommunications networks that must synchronize data across continents to satellite navigation systems that guide vehicles with meter-level precision. They allow scientists to test fundamental theories of physics, searching for any hint that natural constants might be changing over cosmic timescales. They have become our most sensitive tools for exploring the nature of reality itself. As we rest in the quiet darkness, we might reflect on this remarkable achievement, from the first humans who noted the sun's passage across the sky to the scientists who now count the vibrations of individual atoms. The quest to measure time has been one of humanity's most persistent endeavors. In atomic clocks, we have created instruments whose precision would seem like pure magic to any generation before our own. Yet they rest upon the most fundamental properties of nature, ticking away with a regularity that has existed since atoms first formed in the ancient universe. As atomic clocks reached extraordinary precision in laboratories and observatories, their influence began to ripple outward into the fabric of modern life in ways their inventors could scarcely have imagined. The exquisite accuracy these devices achieved, measuring time in billionths of a second, transformed from a scientific curiosity into an absolute necessity for the technological world emerging in the late 20th century. The revolution began quietly in the realm of telecommunications. When engineers designed the first telephone networks, timing precision seemed relatively unimportant. But as communication systems grew more sophisticated, synchronization became critical. By the 1980s, digital telephone networks required all their components, switches, routers, and transmission equipment, to operate in perfect temporal harmony. A timing error of even a few milliseconds could cause calls to drop, data to corrupt, or entire network segments to fail. Telecommunications companies installed atomic clocks at key facilities, creating islands of precision that kept millions of conversations flowing smoothly across continents. The Internet's emergence made timing precision even more essential. Computer networks function through countless coordinated handshakes, where devices confirm they're ready to send and receive information. These digital conversations happen at breathtaking speeds, with packets of data zipping between servers in fractions of a second. Network protocols depend on timestamps to ensure information arrives in the correct order and to detect when something has gone wrong. The Internet's distributed architecture, spanning the entire globe, required a common temporal reference. Atomic clocks, connected through various synchronization protocols, became the invisible conductors, orchestrating this digital symphony. Financial markets discovered their own profound need for precise timekeeping. When stock exchanges operated through open outcry on trading floors, human reaction time set natural limits on transaction speed, but computerized trading transformed everything. By the 1990s, electronic systems could execute trades in milliseconds. This speed created new opportunities and new challenges. When did a trade actually occur? Which order arrived first when multiple parties tried to buy the same stock? These questions had legal and financial implications worth billions of dollars. High-frequency trading pushed timing requirements to extraordinary extremes. Trading algorithms began making decisions in microseconds, buying and selling securities faster than any human could perceive. Firms invested millions in faster computers and shorter network connections, seeking advantages measured in millionths of a second. Stock exchanges installed atomic clocks to timestamp every order with nanosecond precision. Regulations emerged requiring detailed temporal records of all trading activity. The difference between profit and loss, between legal compliance and violation, could hinge on measurements of time finer than the blink of an eye. Then came the global positioning system, perhaps the most elegant demonstration of how atomic precision enables modern miracles. The concept emerged from military needs during the Cold War, when the United States sought reliable navigation for weapons and vehicles. The solution involved a constellation of satellites, each carrying multiple atomic clocks, continuously broadcasting their positions and the precise time. A GPS receiver on Earth listens to signals from multiple satellites, measuring tiny differences in when each signal arrives. Because radio waves travel at the speed of light, these timing differences reveal the receiver's exact distance from each satellite. With signals from 4 or more satellites, the receiver can calculate its position anywhere on Earth. The mathematics behind GPS navigation depends entirely on temporal precision. Light travels approximately 1 foot in a nanosecond, 1/1000th of a second. If a satellite's clock errs by just 1 microsecond, position calculations could be wrong by nearly 1,000 feet. The atomic clocks aboard GPS satellites achieve accuracy measured in nanoseconds, enabling position fixes precise to within meters or even centimeters with advanced techniques. This invisible infrastructure of orbiting timepieces transform navigation for ships, aircraft, automobiles, and eventually smartphones carried by billions of people. GPS applications expanded far beyond navigation. Surveyors use it to map property boundaries with extraordinary precision. Farmers employ GPS-guided tractors that plant seeds in perfectly straight rows, optimizing crop yields. Geologists monitor tectonic plate movements, measuring mere millimeters per year. Emergency services locate callers in distress. Scientists study everything from atmospheric conditions to wildlife migration patterns, using GPS timing and positioning. Perhaps most surprisingly, GPS became critical infrastructure for time distribution itself. The satellite's atomic clocks provide a freely available source of precise time signals anywhere on Earth with a clear view of the sky. Telecommunications networks, power grids, financial systems, and countless other applications tap into GPS timing rather than maintaining their own atomic clocks. This dependency created both convenience and vulnerability, a fact that would prompt ongoing discussions about backup systems and resilience. Power grids discovered their own sophisticated timing needs. Electrical generators across vast regional networks must operate in perfect synchronization, their alternating currents rising and falling in precise phase with one another. Timing errors can cause power flow imbalances, equipment damage, or cascading failures. Grid operators deploy GPS-synchronized clocks throughout their networks, monitoring timing relationships continuously and making tiny adjustments to maintain harmony across thousands of miles of transmission lines. Computer networks faced increasingly complex timing challenges as their speeds increased. Data centers, housing thousands of servers, needed internal synchronization to coordinate their activities. Distributed databases spanning multiple locations required precise timestamps to maintain consistency. Cloud computing services, spreading computational tasks across global infrastructure, depended on accurate time references to function properly. Network engineers developed sophisticated synchronization protocols, creating hierarchies of time servers that distributed atomic clock accuracy throughout the digital realm. Scientific research pushed timing precision into new domains. Particle physics experiments studying subatomic collisions required nanosecond synchronization of detectors scattered across large facilities. Radio astronomy arrays, combining signals from telescopes separated by continents, needed timing accurate to picoseconds, trillionths of a second, to create sharp images of distant cosmic objects. These scientific applications drove continued refinement of timekeeping technology, always seeking greater precision. As the 21st century progressed, modern civilization had become thoroughly dependent on timing infrastructure that would seem like magic to earlier generations. Billions of people carried devices in their pockets that knew the time to microsecond precision. Global systems coordinated activities across continents with nanosecond accuracy. Yet this precision remained largely invisible, noticed only when it failed, or when specialists explained the intricate temporal choreography underlying modern life. The question of how to maintain and improve this critical infrastructure continued to occupy scientists and engineers. As technology advanced and applications demanded ever greater precision, the quest for better timekeeping marched steadily forward, seeking new standards that would serve humanity's needs in an increasingly synchronized world. As the world grew ever more interconnected through the technologies we've explored, a curious problem emerged. With atomic clocks achieving breathtaking precision in laboratories and institutions around the globe, each clock became an independent arbiter of time, measuring seconds with extraordinary accuracy. Yet this very precision created a new challenge. Whose clock would define the official time for planet Earth? The answer came through an elegant system called Coordinated Universal Time, known universally by its curious abbreviation, UTC. You might wonder why it's not COT in English or TUC in French. The solution reflects the diplomatic nature of international timekeeping. The abbreviation was chosen as a compromise that works in multiple languages, a fitting symbol for a time standard designed to unite the world. Coordinated Universal Time emerged in the early 1960s as scientists and engineers grappled with competing sea systems. Some institutions used atomic time, based purely on the unwavering oscillations of cesium atoms. Others relied on astronomical observations, tracking Earth's rotation relative to distant stars. These two measures of time gradually diverged, as our planet's rotation is not perfectly constant. The spinning Earth experiences tiny fluctuations, influenced by ocean tides, atmospheric winds, geological events, and even the gradual redistribution of mass as glaciers melt and reform. The creation of UTC represented a marriage between these two approaches. It would keep the steady, reliable pace of atomic seconds, while occasionally adjusting itself to remain synchronized with Earth's actual rotation. This compromise satisfied both the scientists who needed unwavering precision and the astronomers who maintained humanity's ancient connection to celestial rhythms. The technical heart of UTC resides not in a single location, but exists as a carefully calculated average. Deep inside the Bureau International des Poids et Mesures, the International Bureau of Weights and Measures, located in a quiet suburb of Paris, scientists maintain what they call International Atomic Time. This reference isn't generated by one atomic clock, but represents the weighted average of approximately 400 atomic clocks distributed across more than 70 laboratories in dozens of countries around our world. These contributing clocks come in various designs, though most use cesium atoms as their ticking heart. Each laboratory operates multiple clocks, and the timekeeping institutes regularly compare their measurements through satellite signals and other sophisticated techniques. Some clocks might run slightly fast, others infinitesimally slow. By combining all their measurements through careful statistical analysis, scientists create a time standard more stable and accurate than any single clock could achieve alone. The process of maintaining UTC unfolds with remarkable precision, equally remarkable patience. Each contributing laboratory sends its timing data to Paris monthly. Scientists there analyze these measurements, accounting for the different characteristics of each clock, the effects of the instrument's environment, and even relativistic effects caused by the clock's positions at different elevations and latitudes on Earth's surface. Remember, Einstein showed us that time flows at different rates depending on gravity and motion, and these tiny differences matter when measuring nanoseconds. After processing all this information through complex calculations, the timekeepers issue a circular, essentially a report card showing how each participating clock compared to the calculated ideal. This circular arrives about a month after the measurements were taken, meaning UTC technically exists as a retrospective calculation. The world operates on real-time approximations, called UTC-K, where K represents a particular laboratory. UTC-NIST comes from the United States, UTC-BIPM from France, UTC-USNO from the US Naval Observatory, and so forth. These real-time versions stay within billionths of a second of the eventually calculated official UTC. The most visible aspect of coordinated universal time to most people involves the occasional addition of leap seconds. Because Earth's rotation gradually slows over time, primarily due to tidal friction from the Moon's gravitational pull, solar days are becoming incrementally longer. This effect is incredibly subtle, less than 2 milliseconds per century. But it accumulates. Every few years, when the difference between atomic time and astronomical time approaches 9/10 of a second, timekeepers insert a leap second to keep UTC synchronized with Earth's rotation. These leap seconds typically occur on June 30th or December 31st, creating a minute that contains 61 seconds instead of the usual 60. At 23:59:59, instead of ticking forward to midnight, clocks display 23:59:60 for 1 additional second before advancing to the new day or new year. Since the first leap second was added in 1972, 27 such adjustments have been made, though the intervals between them vary unpredictably because Earth's rotation rate fluctuates in complex ways. Leap seconds have generated considerable debate in the timekeeping community. For astronomers and those maintaining Earth-based navigation systems, they preserve the ancient relationship between time and planetary rotation. Without leap seconds over many centuries, noon would gradually drift away from the moment when the sun reaches its highest point in the sky. But for computer networks, telecommunications systems, and financial markets operating at lightning speed, leap seconds create technical headaches. These systems expect time to flow smoothly forward without irregular interruptions. Programming computers to handle an unexpected extra second has proven surprisingly difficult, occasionally causing software failures and network disruptions. The discussion about potentially abolishing leap seconds and allowing atomic time to gradually diverge from Earth's rotation continues in international scientific bodies. Some argue that maintaining this connection to astronomical time honors thousands of years of human timekeeping tradition. Others suggest that in an age when atomic clocks provide our temporal foundation, adjusting our time system to accommodate Earth's irregular spinning is backwards. For now, leap seconds remain part of our system, each one announced months in advance by the International Earth Rotation and Reference System Service, giving computer systems time to prepare. Coordinated universal time has become the invisible foundation supporting our interconnected world. When you check the time on your smartphone, send an email, or make a video call across continents, UTC synchronizes these activities. Financial markets timestamp transactions in UTC. Air traffic controllers coordinate flights using UTC. Scientists conducting experiments at facilities across the globe synchronize their measurements to UTC. As we drift towards sleep, we might reflect on this remarkable achievement. Hundreds of atomic clocks, maintained by dedicated scientists in laboratories scattered across the planet, all contributing to a shared definition of now. This global collaboration operates quietly, without fanfare, ensuring that when anyone anywhere checks what time it is, that answer ultimately traces back to the same source. In creating coordinated universal time, humanity transformed time itself from a local experience into a planetary commons, a shared resource as essential as the air we breathe, or the mathematics we use to understand the universe. As we've journeyed through the centuries of humanity's quest to measure time with ever greater precision, we arrive now at a profound threshold. For while our ancestors sought merely to mark the hours and divide the days, modern science has revealed that time itself is far stranger and more wonderful than anyone could have imagined. The very nature of what we've been measuring all along turns out to be one of the universe's deepest mysteries. For thousands of years, time seemed absolute and universal. A second in Athens was a second in Beijing. A minute for a farmer was a minute for a king. Time flowed like a great cosmic river, carrying everything along at the same steady pace, indifferent to location or circumstance. This intuitive understanding served humanity well through centuries of sundials and water clocks, through the development of mechanical marvels, and even the first atomic timepieces. Then, in the early years of the 20th century, a young patent clerk in Switzerland named Albert Einstein began thinking deeply about the nature of light and motion. Working in relative obscurity in 1905, Einstein published a paper that would forever transform our understanding of reality itself. His special theory of relativity revealed that time was not the unchanging backdrop everyone had assumed, but something far more fluid and dynamic. Einstein's insight came from considering a deceptively simple question. What would happen if you could travel at speeds approaching the speed of light? Through careful mathematical reasoning, he demonstrated that time itself would slow down for the traveler relative to someone standing still. This phenomenon, known as time dilation, seemed impossible at first. How could time pass at different rates for different observers? Yet the mathematics was undeniable, and soon experimental evidence began to accumulate. The effect is imperceptible in everyday life because we move so slowly compared to light's tremendous velocity. When you drive in a car or fly in an airplane, time does slow down for you ever so slightly, but by amounts so infinitesimally small that even our most precise atomic clocks can barely detect them. However, as speeds increase toward that cosmic speed limit, the effects become dramatic and undeniable. Consider particles created in the upper atmosphere by cosmic rays. These particles, called muons, are inherently unstable and decay in mere millionths of a second. Given their short lifespans and the distance they must travel, they should never reach the Earth's surface. Yet they do, in great numbers. The reason is time dilation. Traveling at nearly the speed of light, time passes more slowly for these particles from our perspective, allowing them to survive long enough to complete their journey. Einstein's later work, his general theory of relativity, published in 1915, revealed an even more remarkable truth. Gravity itself affects the flow of time. The stronger the gravitational field, the more slowly time passes. Near a massive object like Earth, time runs slightly slower than it does far out in space. This isn't metaphor or approximation. Time genuinely passes at different rates depending on gravitational influence. This gravitational time dilation has practical consequences for our modern world. The satellites that orbit Earth for the global positioning system experience weaker gravity than we do on the surface. Time flows slightly faster for those satellites, gaining about 38 microseconds each day compared to clocks on the ground. Without corrections for both gravitational and velocity-based time dilation effects, GPS coordinates would drift by several miles each day, rendering the system useless. The nature of time becomes even more extraordinary in extreme environments. Near a black hole, where gravity reaches incomprehensible intensity, time slows dramatically. An astronaut falling toward a black hole's event horizon would appear to outside observers to slow down, their movements becoming more and more gradual, approaching, but never quite reaching that boundary. Meanwhile, from the astronaut's perspective, time would seem to pass normally for themselves, even as they watch the universe outside speed up dramatically. These revelations fundamentally changed how physicists think about the universe. Time and space are not separate entities, but intimately woven together into what scientists call space-time, a four-dimensional fabric that can bend, stretch, and curve. Massive objects create wells in this fabric, and the flow of time follows the contours of these cosmic valleys and peaks. The implications extend to the very beginning of existence. In the instance following the Big Bang, when the universe was unimaginably dense and hot, time itself behaved in ways that challenge our comprehension. Some physicists propose that time as we understand it might not have existed before a certain threshold, that asking what came before the Big Bang might be as meaningless as asking what lies north of the North Pole. Even the direction of time, its seemingly inexorable flow from past to future, remains a subject of scientific investigation. The fundamental laws of physics, at their most basic level, work equally well whether time moves forward or backward. Yet we experience time's arrow pointing unwaveringly in one direction. The explanation likely lies in entropy, the tendency toward disorder, which consistently increases as time advances. We remember the past but not the future. We see eggs break but not spontaneously reassemble, all because of this thermodynamic arrow of time. Quantum mechanics, that strange science of the very small, adds yet another layer of mystery to time's nature. At quantum scales, Particles can exist in multiple states simultaneously until observed, and their behavior seems to transcend ordinary temporal sequence. Some interpretations suggest that the future might influence the past in ways we're only beginning to explore, though such ideas remain speculative and controversial. As we drift towards sleep, considering these revelations about time's true nature, we might appreciate the journey humanity has taken, from marking shadows on sundials to discovering that time itself bends and flows according to gravity and motion. We've traveled from simple questions about when to plant crops to profound insights into reality's fundamental structure. The atomic clocks we met earlier, so precise they lose mere seconds over millions of years, now serve not just as timekeepers, but as instruments for testing Einstein's theories and probing the universe's deepest secrets. Time, it turns out, is not simply something we measure. It's woven into existence itself, as fundamental and mysterious as space, matter, and energy. And our understanding continues to evolve, revealing ever more intricate layers of this cosmic tapestry. As we step back from the mechanical precision of atomic clocks and the abstract mathematics of relativity, we discover that time exists within us as well, woven into the very fabric of our biology. Long before humans created any device to measure the hours, our bodies were already keeping time with remarkable accuracy. Deep within nearly every living organism, from the simplest bacteria to the most complex mammals, microscopic timekeepers tick away in an ancient rhythm. These biological clocks have evolved over billions of years, aligning life's essential processes with the predictable cycles of our spinning planet. The most familiar of these internal timekeepers is the circadian rhythm, a roughly 24-hour cycle that governs when we feel alert and when we grow drowsy, when our body temperature rises and falls, when hormones flood our system or ebb away. In humans, the master circadian clock resides in a tiny region of the brain called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, a cluster of approximately 20,000 neurons nestled just above where the optic nerves cross. This remarkable biological mechanism receives information about light and darkness directly from our eyes, allowing it to synchronize our internal rhythms with the external world. When morning light enters our eyes, signals travel to this neural timekeeper, helping to reset our daily cycle and maintain alignment with the sun's journey across the sky. But this master clock does not work alone. Scientists have discovered that nearly every cell in our body contains its own molecular timekeeper, tiny genetic loops that cycle through their operations approximately once every 24 hours. These cellular clocks influence everything from our metabolism to our immune response, from our cognitive performance to our emotional states. They determine when our liver is most efficient at processing nutrients, when our muscles achieve their peak strength, and when our mind is sharpest for solving complex problems. The study of these biological rhythms, called chronobiology, has revealed that we are profoundly temporal creatures. Our bodies anticipate the regular patterns of our lives, preparing in advance for expected activities. Body temperature begins rising before we typically wake, readying us for the day ahead. Digestive enzymes increase before our usual mealtimes. Even our pain threshold varies throughout the day, following predictable patterns governed by our internal clocks. Yet our relationship with time extends far beyond these biological rhythms. Different cultures across the world have developed strikingly diverse ways of perceiving and conceptualizing time's passage. In many Western industrial societies, time is often viewed as a precious commodity, something to be saved, spent, or wasted. Schedules rule daily life, with activities measured in precise increments. Punctuality becomes a virtue, and efficiency a goal. Time moves in a linear fashion, an arrow pointing from past through present toward future, with each moment occurring once and never returning. Other cultures embrace different temporal perspectives. Many indigenous communities maintain cyclical views of time, seeing seasons and life stages as recurring patterns rather than unique events marching towards some distant destination. In these worldviews, time circles back upon itself, with past, present, and future more fluid and interconnected. The emphasis falls less on clock watching and more on the natural rhythms of community life and environmental cycles. Some societies operate on what anthropologists call event time rather than clock time. Activities begin when the appropriate conditions arise, when the right people gather, or when the task at hand reaches completion. The fixed appointment, scheduled weeks in advance to begin at precisely 2:30 in the afternoon, holds less cultural significance than responding appropriately to circumstances as they unfold. This more flexible approach to temporality can seem puzzling to those raised with strict schedules, yet it represents a sophisticated adaptation to environments where rigid timing may be impractical or unnecessary. Language itself reveals how differently various cultures conceptualize time. Some languages use spatial metaphors where the past lies ahead, in front of us, where we can see what has already happened, while the unseen future approaches from behind. Others lack precise tense markers, placing less emphasis on whether events occurred yesterday or tomorrow. The Hopi language of North America, for instance, structures temporal concepts in ways that early linguists found difficult to translate into European grammatical frameworks, suggesting fundamentally different ways of organizing temporal experience. Modern research into time perception has revealed how subjective our experience of duration can be. A watched pot never boils, as the saying goes, because our attention makes time seem to stretch. Novel experiences feel longer in retrospect than routine activities, which is why childhood summers seemed endless, while adult years fly past with increasing speed. As we age and each year represents a smaller fraction of our total life experience, our psychological sense of time's passage accelerates. Emotional states profoundly influence temporal perception. Fear and danger trigger heightened awareness that seems to slow time, allowing us to process more information during crisis moments. Deep engagement in absorbing tasks creates flow states where hours vanish unnoticed. Boredom stretches seconds into eternities. Our biological clocks tick at steady rates, but our conscious experience of duration varies wildly based on context and mental state. The modern world increasingly conflicts with our natural temporal rhythms. Electric lighting extends activity far beyond sunset, confusing the circadian signals that evolved under natural light cycles. International travel hurls us across time zones faster than our biological clocks can adjust, creating the disorienting fatigue we call jet lag. Shift work forces people to remain alert when their body insists on sleep. Constant connectivity through digital devices disrupts the natural boundaries between activity and rest that once structured human life. Scientists have documented measurable health consequences when our lifestyle chronically misaligns with our biological rhythms. Sleep deprivation, metabolic disorders, mood disturbances, and decreased cognitive performance can all result from sustained disruption of our internal timekeepers. Yet awareness of chronobiology also opens possibilities for working with our natural rhythms rather than against them, timing activities to match our body's predictable patterns of readiness and rest. As we settle into the calm of evening, our bodies already know that sleep approaches. Melatonin rises in our bloodstream. Body temperature begins its nightly decline, and alertness gradually fades. These changes require no conscious decision, no external timepiece to announce the hour. Our ancient biological clocks, refined across countless generations, guide us gently toward rest, honoring rhythms far older than any human invention for measuring time. As we arrive at the present moment and gaze toward tomorrow, humanity's quest to measure time with ever greater precision continues unabated. The journey that began with our ancestors, observing shadows on the ground, has led us to laboratories where scientists now manipulate individual atoms of light, pushing the boundaries of measurement to realms our forebears could scarcely have imagined. In laboratories around the world, a new generation of timepieces is emerging that makes even atomic clocks seem imprecise by comparison. These are optical lattice clocks, devices that trap thousands of atoms in grids of laser light and measure their oscillations at frequencies hundreds of thousands of times higher than cesium atomic clocks. Where cesium atoms vibrate about 9 billion times per second, the strontium and ytterbium atoms used in optical lattice clocks oscillate in the hundreds of trillions of times per second. This dramatic increase in frequency allows these clocks to achieve accuracy that would not lose or gain a single second over 15 billion years, longer than the current age of the universe itself. The development of optical lattice clocks represents more than simply better timekeeping. These instruments are so sensitive that they can detect the effects of Einstein's general relativity across distances of mere centimeters. Place two optical lattice clocks at different heights in the same room, and the one positioned closer to Earth will tick measurably slower due to gravitational time dilation. This extraordinary sensitivity opens possibilities that transform these clocks into scientific instruments capable of mapping tiny variations in Earth's gravitational field, potentially revealing underground water reservoirs, mineral deposits, or volcanic activity through their subtle effects on the flow of time itself. As these optical clocks transition from experimental devices to practical standards, the international community faces decisions about redefining the second itself. The current definition, established in 1967, ties the second to cesium atoms. Future timekeeping standards may shift to optical frequencies, requiring coordination among nations and scientific institutions worldwide. This transition echoes the great time standardization efforts of previous centuries, reminding us that even our most fundamental measurements remain human agreements, subject to refinement as our capabilities grow. Beyond Earth's surface, timekeeping faces new frontiers and challenges. Space exploration demands ever more sophisticated solutions to temporal coordination. The global positioning system relies on satellites carrying atomic clocks, but as humanity ventures deeper into the solar system, new approaches become necessary. A signal from Mars can take between 4 and 24 minutes to reach Earth, depending on the planet's positions in their orbits. This delay makes real-time coordination impossible, requiring spacecraft to maintain their own highly accurate time standards, independent of Earth-based references. Plans for lunar bases and Mars settlements necessitate consideration of entirely new time systems. Should astronauts on Mars follow Earth time, or adopt a Martian day that lasts 24 hours and 39 minutes? Should the Moon, with its 29.5-day cycle from sunrise to sunrise, have its own temporal framework? These questions extend the story of timekeeping into realms where human intuition about days and nights must accommodate alien skies and unfamiliar rhythms. The realm of quantum computing presents its own temporal puzzles. Quantum computers operate on principles where particles exist in multiple states simultaneously until measured, creating computational possibilities that classical computers cannot achieve. Coordinating operations within these systems requires timing precision at femtosecond scales, 1/millionth of 1/billionth of a second. As quantum computers develop from experimental curiosities into practical tools, they will both demand and enable new levels of temporal control, measuring and manipulating events at timescales where our everyday intuitions about cause and effect begin to blur. Scientists exploring the fundamental nature of reality continue investigating whether time itself might be quantized, composed of discrete, indivisible moments rather than flowing smoothly and continuously. Some theories suggest a Planck time, approximately 1/10 millionth of 1/trillionth of 1/trillionth of 1/trillionth of a second, might represent a fundamental temporal unit below which the concept of shorter durations becomes meaningless. Whether such a limit truly exists remains an open question, one that future generations of physicists will explore with instruments we are only beginning to imagine. The practical applications of ultra-precise timekeeping extend into everyday life in ways that often go unnoticed. Financial markets now execute trades in microseconds, requiring timestamp accuracy that prevents disputes about transaction order. Communication networks synchronize data streams from around the globe, depending on shared temporal references. Navigation systems guide vehicles through city streets and aircraft across continents, all relying on the invisible infrastructure of precise time distribution. As our technologies become more sophisticated and interconnected, they weave time measurement ever more deeply into the fabric of modern existence. Looking toward the coming decades, researchers envision portable optical clocks small enough to carry, bringing unprecedented precision out of specialized laboratories and into field applications. Imagine geologists using handheld devices to map underground structures by detecting gravitational effects on time's passage, or engineers monitoring bridges and buildings for structural stress by measuring tiny temporal variations. These possibilities transform time measurement from simply knowing when into understanding the physical world in fundamentally new ways. The future may also bring renewed attention to the human experience of time, as our mechanical and atomic timepieces achieve ever more perfect regularity. Perhaps we will gain fresh appreciation for the fluid, subjective quality of lived temporal experience, the child for whom summer vacation seems endless, and the adult for whom years rush past. the moments that stretch in crisis, and those that vanish in joy. These human experiences of time's passage remain wonderfully resistant to standardization. Our increasingly sophisticated clocks measure time with extraordinary precision, yet they cannot capture time's felt quality, its weight and texture in consciousness. As we conclude this journey through timekeeping's long history, we recognize that the story continues. Each generation discovers new questions about time's nature and develops new methods to measure its passage. The sundials and water clocks of antiquity, the mechanical wonders of cathedral towers, the pendulums that swung in observatories, the quartz crystals humming in wristwatches, the cesium atoms vibrating in time standards, and now the trapped ions and strontium lattices of tomorrow's clocks all represent humanity's enduring fascination with this most mysterious dimension of existence. Time remains, in many ways, as enigmatic as when our distant ancestors first wondered about the sun's daily journey across the sky. We have learned to measure it with breathtaking precision, to divide it into ever smaller increments, to synchronize it across continents, and coordinate it between planets. Yet time itself, its essential nature, why it flows in one direction, whether it had a beginning and will have an end, these questions still invite wonder and investigation. And so the quest continues, as it has for millennia, driven by the same curiosity that first led humans to mark shadows on stone and watch water drip through clay vessels. In this eternal present moment, as you prepare for sleep, you join the countless generations who have watched time's passage, each finding their own meaning in the rhythmic alternation of day and night, waking and sleeping, the endless dance of moments that carries us all forward into tomorrow. As we bring to a close our journey through the remarkable story of timekeeping, from the first sundials casting their ancient shadows to the extraordinary precision of atomic clocks, we hope these stories have gently carried you through the evening. Thank you for joining us on this peaceful exploration through humanity's eternal dance with time. If these calm adventures have brought you comfort, we'd love to have you with us again. Like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below. And now, as the night deepens and your mind settles, we wish you the sweetest of dreams. Good night, fellow dreamer, and may your sleep be restful, your dreams be kind,